We're drifting slowly into the timeline of Silent Hill, a small town wrapped in endless fog, where the line between the living and the dead was always thin, and grief has a way of taking shape. What began as sacred ground, tended by those who understood its power, would unravel across the centuries into a place that feeds on guilt, on sorrow, on the secrets we bury the deepest. Tonight, we trace that long descent, slowly, piece by piece, letting the quiet carry you under. Born long before any map ever bore its name, Silent Hill was a place the old people called holy. A thin place, they said, where prayers were heard, and where something far older than prayer listened back. They kept the balance with ritual and reverence, holding the darkness gently beneath the surface. But beneath the calm waters of Toluca Lake, beneath the church bells and the painted houses that would come in the years to follow, something waited. A power with no name, patient and dormant, ready to wake at the first true taste of human suffering. This is the story of how a quiet town became a mirror for the soul's deepest wounds, how faith slowly curdled into a cult, how a mother's love and a child's agony tore a wound between worlds, how the guilty are drawn back again and again to be judged by monsters that wear the shape of their own sins. It is a story of fog and rust, of sirens crying in the dark, of Pyramid Head and the Order, of Alessa and Heather and James, of souls who simply could not rest. A story that loops back on itself, where what happened centuries ago is still happening now, in the fog, in the rust, in the minds of all who wander into that cursed place. So settle in and close your eyes, and let the fog roll slowly in. There is no rush here, not tonight. We have all the time in the world to remember the dead. We begin our journey long before the town bore a name, in the centuries before European maps charted these shores, when the land itself was young and wild and open to the spirits that walked between worlds. The region that would one day be called Silent Hill, nestled beside the cold waters of Toluca Lake, was home to Native American tribes who understood, perhaps better than any who came after, that this place was different, sacred, dangerous, a threshold where the membrane between life and death grew thin as morning mist. The Toluca people, among others, made their lives here in the pre-1600s era, in the ancient days when the forest stretched unbroken and the lake reflected only sky and stone. They did not simply inhabit this land. They listened to it. They felt its pulse beneath their feet, heard its whispers in the wind that moved through the pines, tasted its power in the fog that rolled in without warning, thick and silent, swallowing sound and sight alike. The mist was not merely weather to them. It was a veil, a curtain drawn between the world of flesh and the world of spirit, and when it descended, the boundary between those realms grew permeable, uncertain, alive with possibility and peril. The tribes recognized early that certain places within this region held concentrated spiritual energy, nodes of power where the earth itself seemed to breathe with otherworldly intention. They identified a holy ground, a place of power, a site where offerings could reach the ears of forces beyond human comprehension. This was not superstition born of ignorance. This was knowledge earned through generations of observation, through dreams that came true, through visions that manifested in waking life, through the undeniable sense that something vast and ancient dwelt here, watching, waiting, responding to the prayers and fears of those who walked upon its soil. Over time, the tribes developed a unique spiritual system, a cosmology that reflected the strange nature of the land they called home. At the center of their belief stood a god, an entity not of distant heaven, but of this very earth, this very lake, this very fog. The god they worshipped was immanent, present, woven into the fabric of the place itself. It was a being of immense power, capable of granting wishes, of manifesting desires, of reshaping reality according to the intensity of human will and emotion. But such power came with a price. The god demanded devotion, demanded sacrifice, demanded suffering. For the tribes understood, through long experience and painful wisdom, that suffering was not merely an affliction to be endured. Suffering was a currency. Suffering was a catalyst. Suffering was the fuel that ignited spiritual energy, that bridged the gap between the material and the immaterial, that allowed the impossible to become real. Strong emotions, particularly those born of pain, of loss, of anguish, could manifest tangible spiritual force in this place. Grief could open doors. Terror could summon visions. Agony could reshape the world itself. This understanding led to practices that would seem dark to outsiders. Rituals designed to appease the spirits and maintain the delicate balance between worlds. The tribes performed ceremonies that involved human sacrifice, offerings of blood and life to the god that dwelt in the land. These were not acts of cruelty for cruelty's sake. They were acts of communion, of negotiation, of desperate necessity. The shamans and spiritual leaders who guided these rituals believed, with the certainty of those who had witnessed the consequences of neglect, that without such offerings, the balance would tip, the veil would tear, and the other world would bleed into their own, with catastrophic results. The other world, that was their name for the spiritual dimension that existed parallel to, intertwined with, inseparable from the physical reality they inhabited. It was not a distant afterlife, not a heaven or hell removed from the concerns of the living. It was here, always here, pressing against the edges of perception, visible in glimpses and dreams, accessible through ritual and trance and the thin places where the fog grew thick. The other world was a reflection, a shadow, a dark mirror of the world of flesh, shaped by the emotions and beliefs of those who touched it. It could be paradise or nightmare, sanctuary or prison, depending on the soul that entered it, depending on the guilt or innocence, the hope or despair that soul carried within. The tribes practiced a form of ancestor worship, maintaining shrines and conducting ceremonies to honor those who had passed beyond the veil. They believed, with good reason, that the spirits of the dead did not simply vanish into oblivion. The dead remained, lingering in the mist, dwelling in the other world, capable of influencing the living in profound and sometimes terrible ways. A restless spirit, one denied proper rights or consumed by unfinished business, could reach across the boundary and touch the world of flesh, bringing omens, visions, warnings, or curses. The shamans learned to interpret these signs, to read the language of dreams and portents, to negotiate with the dead on behalf of the living. The Toluca tribe, in particular, established a lasting settlement near the shores of the lake, drawn by the spiritual potency of the location. They called the area Silent Hill, a name born of the peculiar quality of the mist that descended without warning, muffling sound, swallowing voices, creating pockets of eerie, oppressive quiet even in daylight. The silence was not peaceful. It was expectant, watchful, as if the land itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, for someone to speak the right words, to perform the right ritual, to open the right door. The shamans of the Toluca people were the keepers of this dangerous knowledge, the intermediaries between the tribe and the forces that dwelt in the fog. They entered trance states, journeyed into the other world in spirit form, returned with visions that guided the tribe's decisions. They interpreted the signs that appeared in the natural world, the behavior of animals, the patterns of mist and water, the dreams that came to members of the tribe in the deep hours of night. They understood that the God they worshipped was not benevolent in any simple sense. It was powerful, yes, capable of granting wishes and manifesting desires, but it was also capricious, hungry, demanding. It responded to the intensity of human emotion, to the depth of human suffering, and it shaped reality according to the fears and longings of those who called upon it. The concept of paradise held a central place in their spiritual system, but it was a paradise that could only be achieved through suffering. This was not the passive endurance of hardship, but the active embrace of pain as a transformative force, as a purifying fire that burned away the dross of ordinary existence and left behind something pure, something worthy of union with the divine. The shamans taught that those who suffered deeply, who offered their pain to the god, who surrendered themselves completely to the spiritual forces of the land, could transcend the limitations of mortal life and enter a state of bliss, a paradise that existed within or beyond the other world, a place where all desires were fulfilled, all wounds healed, all separations mended. But this promise of paradise came with a shadow, a darker implication that the shamans understood, even if they did not always speak it aloud. The God that granted wishes could also bring destruction. The power that manifested desires could manifest nightmares with equal ease. The other world that promised paradise could just as easily become a hell, a prison of suffering tailored to the specific guilt and fear of the soul trapped within it. The line between salvation and damnation, between transcendence and torment, was perilously thin in this place, and it depended entirely on the state of the soul that crossed the threshold. The rituals performed to maintain balance grew more elaborate over the generations, passed down from shaman to apprentice, refined and adapted as the tribe learned more about the nature of the power they were dealing with. They built sacred sites, stone circles and burial mounds and offering platforms, places where the veil was thinnest and communication with the other world most clear. They developed a calendar of ceremonies tied to the seasons, to the phases of the moon, to the movements of the stars, each ritual designed to appease specific spirits or channel specific energies. And when the balance seemed most precarious, when omens grew dark and the mist grew thick and the shaman's visions turned to nightmares, they performed the ultimate sacrifice, offering human life to the god in the hope of averting catastrophe. These sacrifices were not random acts of violence. They were carefully chosen, ritually prepared, conducted with reverence and solemnity. The victim, often a young person deemed pure or spiritually sensitive, was honored as a bridge between worlds, a vessel through which the tribe's prayers could reach the god. The act of sacrifice was meant to release intense spiritual energy, to create a surge of power that would satisfy the god's hunger and renew the covenant between the tribe and the land. Whether this truly worked, whether the god was truly appeased or merely dormant, the shamans could not say with certainty. They knew only that the rituals had been performed for generations, that the balance had held, and that to cease the offerings would be to invite disaster. The tribes maintained their deep connection to the other world through these practices, through their willingness to engage with the darkness as well as the light, through their acceptance of suffering as a sacred force. They did not fear the mist. They walked into it knowingly, deliberately, seeking communion with the spirits that dwelt there. They did not shy away from the thin places, the holy ground, the sites of power. They built their lives around them, shaped their culture and spirituality to honor and harness the forces that moved through the land. And so the centuries passed, the tribes living in uneasy harmony with the power that dwelt in the fog, offering their prayers and their sacrifices, interpreting their visions and their omens, maintaining the delicate balance between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. They could not have known in those ancient days that others would come, that the land would be claimed and renamed, that the spiritual system they had built over generations would be twisted and corrupted by those who sought power without understanding, who craved paradise without accepting the cost. They could not have foreseen the town that would rise on their holy ground, the tragedies that would unfold there, the souls that would be trapped in the very other world they had learned to navigate with such care. But the foundation was laid here, in these pre-1600 centuries, in the beliefs and practices of the Toluca people and their neighbors. The land was sacred. The veil was thin. The God was real. Suffering was power. And the other world was always waiting, always watching, always ready to manifest the deepest fears and darkest desires of any soul that dared to enter its silent, fog-shrouded embrace. The land remembers always, and as we drift forward through time, centuries pass in silence, the sacred ground undisturbed, the spirits watching, waiting. Then, in the early years of the 1600s, ships arrive from across the ocean, carrying men and women who know nothing of what lies beneath their feet, who see only wilderness to be tamed, emptiness to be filled with their own visions of righteousness and order. European settlers come to the region, drawn by promises of new beginnings, of land unclaimed, though of course it is not unclaimed at all. The Kagami tribe still walks these forests, still performs their rituals at the sacred sites, still understands that the power here must be honored, must be approached with reverence and caution. But the settlers see only savages, only obstacles to their divine mission, and within a generation the displacement begins in earnest. The natives are driven from their ancestral grounds, pushed deeper into the wilderness, hunted when they resist, killed when they refuse to leave. Some flee, carrying with them the old knowledge, the warnings, the understanding of what this place truly is. Others die defending the burial grounds, the ceremonial sites, the thin places where the veil grows gossamer and fragile. Their blood soaks into the same earth that has drunk so much suffering already, and the land, patient and hungry, absorbs it all. By the late 1600s, the Kagami are gone, scattered or dead, and the settlers establish their community in earnest. They are Puritans, these colonists, strict in their faith, unyielding in their moral certainty, convinced that they are building a city on a hill, a beacon of godliness in the new world. They name their settlement, and though the name will change over the decades, the seed of what will become Silent Hill is planted here, in soil that remembers everything, that holds the echoes of the indigenous prayers and the screams of those who tried to protect it. The settlers build their homes, their meeting houses, their churches, directly atop the ancient burial grounds, the sacred sites where the Kagami once performed their careful rituals of appeasement and balance. They are unaware, most of them, of what they are doing, of the significance of the places they desecrate with their foundations and their fences. And those few who might suspect, who hear whispers from the remaining natives, or who feel something wrong in the air on certain nights, they actively suppress such thoughts, dismiss them as superstition, as the lies of heathens who worship false gods. The town grows, slowly, carefully, bound by strict religious codes and the constant scrutiny of neighbors watching neighbors for signs of moral failing, for deviations from the narrow path. And it is here, in this atmosphere of fear and judgment, that the land's latent power begins to make itself felt in new ways, subtle at first, working through the settlers' own paranoia and zealotry. Strange things happen, small things that might be explained away. A cow gives birth to a stillborn calf with too many legs. A child speaks in her sleep, words in a language no one recognizes, though it sounds almost like the tongue the Kagami once spoke. A woman dreams of fire and wakes to find her hands blistered, though no flame has touched them. These incidents might be nothing, might be coincidence or illness or the product of overactive imaginations, but in a community already primed to see the devil's work in every shadow, they become something more, become evidence of a corruption that must be rooted out. The witch hunts begin in the early 1700s, not all at once but gradually, accusations building like storm clouds on the horizon. It starts with a woman named Mercy Hathorn, a midwife who knows herbs and remedies, who has helped birth half the children in the settlement, but who also possesses knowledge that makes the elders uncomfortable, who speaks sometimes of balance and natural forces in ways that sound too much like the heathen beliefs of the natives. When 3 infants die in a single winter, all born healthy under her care, all succumbing to sudden illness within days of their births, the whispers begin. Witchcraft, they say, devil's work, a pact with dark powers. Mercy protests her innocence, weeps and prays and calls upon God to witness her pure heart. But the accusations have been made, and in this place, in this time, with the land's power working through the settlers' fear like poison through water, there can be only one outcome. They drown her in the lake, the same body of water that will one day bear the town's name, that will reflect the fog and the darkness for centuries to come. They bind her hands and feet. They speak prayers over her struggling form, and they hold her under until the bubbles stop rising, until her body goes limp and the water closes over her like a grave. And as she dies, as her lungs fill and her vision darkens, the land drinks in her terror, her desperation, her final anguished thoughts of injustice and betrayal. The power grows stronger, fed by suffering, and the executions have only just begun. More accusations follow, a cascade of fear and suspicion that sweeps through the settlement like fever. Anyone who deviates from the strict Puritan norms becomes suspect. A man who prefers solitude, who lives at the edge of the settlement and speaks little, is accused of consorting with demons in the forest. A young woman who refuses a marriage proposal from the minister's son finds herself charged with using witchcraft to ensnare men's hearts and then spurning them out of cruelty. an elderly couple who practice small folk rituals brought from the old country, harmless charms for good harvest and healthy livestock, are denounced as servants of Satan. The trials are swift, the evidence flimsy, confessions extracted through sleep deprivation and threats, and the promise that confession might bring mercy, though it rarely does. The executions become public spectacles, rituals of their own, the entire community gathering to witness the purging of evil from their midst. They burn some of the accused, tying them to stakes in the town square, piling wood at their feet, setting the flames while the condemned scream and the crowd watches in horrified fascination. Children held up to see, the smell of burning flesh mixing with the smoke. They drown others as they drowned Mercy Hathorn, in the lake or in the river that feeds it, holding them under while ministers read scripture, while the accused thrash and fight for air that will not come. They hang some, building a gallows at the edge of town, leaving the bodies to swing for days as warnings, as reminders of what happens to those who stray from righteousness. Perhaps 24 people die this way over the course of 3 decades, perhaps more, the records incomplete, some executions unrecorded, some bodies buried in unmarked graves or left to rot where they fell. Most of them are innocent, guilty of nothing more than being different, being inconvenient, being in the wrong place when the community needed a scapegoat for its fears and failures. Their suffering is immense, their deaths agonizing, and every scream, every prayer for mercy that goes unanswered, every moment of terror as the flames rise or the water closes over or the rope tightens, all of it seeps into the ground, into the foundations of the town, into the very air that future generations will breathe, the land's power, already strong from centuries of indigenous ritual and the violence of displacement, grows exponentially, amplified by this new wave of anguish and injustice. It begins to influence the town more overtly, though the settlers do not recognize it for what it is, interpret it instead through their religious framework as divine judgment or demonic assault. People have visions, see things that cannot be there, shadows that move wrong, faces in windows of empty houses, hear voices calling their names from the forest at night. The nightmares grow worse, more vivid, more shared, multiple people waking from the same dream of burning or drowning or being crushed beneath the earth. Some go mad, speaking in tongues, clawing at their own skin, claiming they are being punished for sins they did not commit, or that the town itself is cursed, built on ground that God has forsaken. The ministers preach harder, longer, demanding more piety, more vigilance, more purging of sin, but their efforts only feed the cycle, create more fear, more accusations, more suffering. The town becomes a place of paranoia and dread, where neighbors spy on neighbors, where children inform on parents, where trust erodes and every misfortune, every illness, every crop failure or stillbirth or unexplained death is attributed to witchcraft, to hidden evil that must be exposed and destroyed. The executions continue, sporadic but persistent, a drumbeat of violence that echoes through the decades, each death adding another layer to the dark foundation being laid, another thread in the web of supernatural malevolence that will one day consume the town entirely. By the mid-1700s, the witch hunts begin to subside, not because the fear has diminished, but because the community has exhausted itself, has killed so many that suspicion turns inward, that the accusers begin to fear they might be next. that the whole structure of persecution threatens to collapse into chaos. The executions stop, the trials end, but the damage is done, irreversible and profound. The town's history of persecution, of innocent blood spilled in the name of righteousness, has laid the groundwork for everything that will follow, has charged the land with such concentrated negative energy that it becomes a beacon, a lodestone for darkness and suffering. The spirits of the executed linger, unable to rest, their anguish trapped in the places they died, in the lake, in the town square, in the forest where some were hunted down and killed, without even the pretense of trial. And the land, patient and hungry, continues to remember, continues to gather power, continues to wait for the moment when all this accumulated suffering will reach critical mass, when the veil will tear completely and the nightmares will walk freely in the waking world. The settlers do not understand what they have done, cannot comprehend that their righteous fury and their executions have fed something ancient and terrible, have transformed their city on a hill into a monument to pain and injustice that will haunt the region for centuries to come. They believe they have purged the evil, made their town safe and godly, but in truth they have only planted seeds of darkness that will grow in the shadows, roots sinking deep into cursed ground, waiting for the right conditions to bloom into horror beyond imagining. The years pass, the witch hunts fade into memory, and by the time the 1800s arrive, Silent Hill has begun to transform itself. The town that once trembled with the echoes of trials and burnings now reinvents its image, its past buried beneath a veneer of progress and prosperity. The 19th century brings with it a new identity, a new purpose, and the town grows, expands, stretches its borders outward toward the lake, toward the mountains, toward something that resembles respectability. Silent Hill becomes a resort town. Tourists arrive by stagecoach, later by rail, drawn by advertisements promising scenic beauty, clean mountain air, and the healing waters of Toluca Lake. The lake itself, once sacred to the native peoples who lived here, is now marketed as a destination, a place where city dwellers can escape the smoke and noise of industrial America. Hotels rise along the shoreline. Boardwalks extend over the water. The town builds itself up, layer by layer, each new structure covering something older, something forgotten, something that perhaps should have remained undisturbed. But this growth, this prosperity, comes at a cost. The town's original inhabitants, the Native Americans who called this place sacred, who understood the land's true nature, are displaced. Some are forced onto reservations far from their ancestral grounds. Others are assimilated, their names changed, their languages forbidden, their children sent to schools that teach them to forget. Their sacred sites, the places where they performed ceremonies to keep the darkness contained, to maintain the balance between worlds, are abandoned, overgrown, or worse, repurposed. The meanings behind their rituals are lost, misinterpreted, twisted into curiosities for tourists, or dismissed as primitive superstition by the town's new residents. And in that forgetting, in that erasure, something begins to stir. The spiritual practices that once kept the town's darker nature in check are no longer performed. The warnings passed down through generations are no longer heeded. The land remembers, even if the people do not. In the shadows of this growing town, a local cult begins to form. It starts small, quietly, in parlors and back rooms, among families who have lived in Silent Hill for generations, who remember fragments of the old stories, who sense that something ancient still dwells beneath the surface. They are influenced by the Native American beliefs, but they do not truly understand them. They see the symbols, the rituals, the references to a divine power, and they interpret these things through their own lens, their own desires, their own hunger for meaning in a world that feels increasingly hollow. This cult, which will come to be known as the Order, begins to reinterpret and distort the spiritual practices they have inherited or discovered. Where the native peoples sought balance, the Order seeks power. Where the original rituals were meant to contain the darkness, the Order's ceremonies aim to harness it, to use it, to bring about something they call paradise. They speak of a god, a divine being that sleeps beneath the town, waiting to be awakened. They believe that if they can revive this god through the right rituals, the right sacrifices, the right devotion, they will be rewarded with a new world, a perfect world, a paradise born from the ashes of the old. The Order's theology is a patchwork, a strange amalgamation of Native American symbolism, Christian mysticism, and something darker, something that seems to emerge from the land itself. They adopt the idea of the town as sacred ground, but they twist it, claiming that Silent Hill is not merely a place to be protected, but a place chosen for transformation. They speak of suffering as purification, of sacrifice as necessary, of death as a doorway to rebirth. Their beliefs are fluid, evolving, shaped by visions and dreams that their leaders claim to receive, visions that may be divine revelation or something far more sinister. As the Order grows, the town begins to experience unexplained disappearances. A farmer vanishes from his field, his tools left behind, his family never seeing him again. A young woman fails to return from a walk in the woods, her body never found. Children go missing, sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone, and the searches yield nothing but silence. The authorities, such as they are in this growing but still remote town, attribute these incidents to wild animals, to accidents, to runaways seeking a better life elsewhere. The official records are sparse, carefully worded, designed to avoid alarming the tourists who bring money into the town's economy. But the people who live here, who have roots that go back generations, they whisper. They know that something is wrong. They sense that the disappearances follow patterns, that they cluster around certain dates, certain locations, certain families. But fear keeps them silent, or perhaps something deeper, a compulsion woven into the town itself, a reluctance to speak of things that should remain hidden. The Order establishes hidden places of worship, ritual sites scattered throughout Silent Hill and its surroundings. Some are in the deep woods, clearings marked with stones arranged in patterns that echo the Native American sacred sites, but serve a different purpose. Others are beneath existing structures, in cellars and tunnels and spaces carved into the rock beneath the town. The Order is patient, methodical, building its infrastructure slowly, ensuring that its activities remain concealed from those who would not understand, who would not believe, who would try to stop them. The Toluca prison is established during this era, initially as a correctional facility meant to house criminals from the surrounding region. It is built on the outskirts of town, its stone walls rising stark and grey against the landscape. The location is isolated, remote, far enough from the resort areas that tourists need not be reminded of the darker aspects of human nature. but this isolation makes it perfect for other purposes. The order, through members who hold positions of influence, begins to exert control over certain aspects of the prison's operation. Guards are recruited or coerced, or simply look the other way when strange things occur in the deeper cells, the ones that do not appear in official records. Prisoners disappear from their cells, and the reports state that they escaped or died of illness, or were transferred to other facilities. The truth is buried beneath layers of paperwork and silence. Brookhaven Hospital is also established in the 1800s, initially as a sanatorium for those suffering from tuberculosis and other ailments that benefit from the mountain air. It is built on a hillside overlooking the town, a sprawling structure of brick and iron, its architecture reflecting the medical theories of the time. The patients who come here are often isolated from society, their families relieved to have them somewhere out of sight, somewhere they can be cared for without burdening the household. This isolation, this separation from the world, makes Brookhaven vulnerable to the cult's influence. Doctors and nurses who are members of the order or who are sympathetic to its goals find positions at the hospital. The nature of the patients, many of whom are delirious, confused, or mentally unstable, provides cover for experiments, for rituals, for practices that would be unthinkable in a more public setting. The hospital's basement, its storage rooms, its morgue, these become spaces where the boundaries between healing and harm blur, where the order's dark work can be conducted beneath the guise of medical treatment. Certain families become intertwined with the cult's activities during this period. The Gillespie line, the Shepherd line, and others whose names will echo through Silent Hill's history. They are drawn into the order's web. Some join willingly, seduced by promises of power, of enlightenment, of a place in the paradise to come. They attend the secret meetings, participate in the rituals, offer their loyalty and their resources to the cause. Others become involved unknowingly, marrying into cult families, inheriting properties that sit on sacred ground, finding themselves caught in obligations and traditions they do not fully understand. The cult operates through bloodlines, through inheritance, through bonds of family and community that are difficult to break. A child born into a cult family is raised with the order's teachings, shaped by its worldview, prepared from birth to serve its purposes. The order begins to experiment with methods of control, of manipulation, of inducing the visions and altered states that their leaders claim bring them closer to the God they seek to revive. They discover, or perhaps rediscover, the use of hallucinogenic drugs derived from plants that grow in the forests around Silent Hill. These substances, when prepared correctly, when administered during rituals, produce powerful visions, experiences that the order interprets as divine communication. Members report seeing the God, hearing its voice, receiving instructions that guide the cult's actions. Whether these visions are genuine spiritual experiences or merely the product of chemical alteration, the order does not question. The visions serve their purpose, reinforcing belief, deepening commitment, creating a shared mythology that binds the members together. The rituals themselves grow more elaborate, more demanding as the century progresses. What begins as simple ceremonies, candles and chanting and offerings of food or flowers, evolves into something darker. The order comes to believe that the God requires sacrifice, that blood must be spilled, that suffering must be offered, that only through the most profound acts of devotion can the divine be awakened. The disappearances increase. The ritual sites are marked with symbols drawn in blood, with bones arranged in patterns, with remnants of ceremonies that speak of desperation and obsession. And through it all, the town continues to grow. More hotels, more shops, more families moving in to take advantage of the economic opportunities. The surface remains beautiful, inviting, prosperous, but beneath, in the hidden places, in the forgotten corners, in the spaces between what is seen and what is known, the order's influence spreads like roots through dark soil, drawing strength from the town's buried past, preparing for a future that only they can see, a paradise they believe is just within reach, if only they can find the right ritual, the right sacrifice, the right way to open the door that has been closed for so long. The 19th century ends with Silent Hill firmly established as a destination, a place of beauty and promise. But the seeds of its true nature have been planted deep, nourished by blood and belief, waiting for the right conditions to bloom into something terrible. We move forward now, through the decades, through the quiet years when the town's darkness grew roots deeper still, until we arrive at a cold night in 1976, the year when a stranger, an outsider with no connection to Silent Hill's web of secrets, would be pulled from his ordinary life into the heart of the town's nightmare. The year when everything that had been building, all the rituals and prayers and desperate acts of faith, would converge in fire and agony. His name was Travis Grady, a truck driver who knew the highways of America better than he knew any home. A man who lived in motion, always passing through, never staying. He drove the long routes, the empty stretches where the radio faded to static and the white lines blurred into meditation. On this particular night, his route took him along the outskirts of Silent Hill, through the fog that clung to the mountain roads like something alive, something patient. He had no reason to stop, no reason to look twice at the town that sat quiet in the valley below. But Silent Hill, we must understand, has always had a way of calling to those it needs, of reaching out across the fog to touch the lives of strangers and pull them into its orbit. As Travis guided his truck along the winding road, the fog grew thicker, pressing against his windshield, turning the world beyond into nothing but grey and shadow. And then, in the pale wash of his headlights, a figure appeared. A young girl, small and ghostly, standing in the center of the road, her face turned toward him, her eyes reflecting the light. Travis had only a moment, a heartbeat to react. He wrenched the wheel hard, felt the truck skid and lurch, felt the world tilt as he fought for control. The crash was not violent, not the catastrophic end it might have been. But it was enough. Enough to leave him shaken, disoriented, standing on the empty road with his truck damaged and the girl, that ghostly figure, nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she had never been there at all. Perhaps she was only the first manifestation, the first whisper of the town reaching out to him. But Travis, practical and grounded, searched the road, searched the fog, and found nothing but silence. And then, carried on the cold air, he smelled it. Smoke. The acrid bite of something burning, wood and fabric and something else. Something that made his stomach turn. He followed the smell, followed it through the fog until he saw the glow. Orange and angry against the grey, a house consumed by flames. The Gillespie house, though Travis did not know the name, stood engulfed, fire pouring from its windows, climbing its walls, roaring with a hunger that seemed almost purposeful. and inside he could hear it, faint beneath the crackling and the roar, a sound that might have been crying, might have been screaming. Travis did not hesitate. He ran toward the fire, felt the heat slam against him like a physical force, covered his face, and pushed through the door into the inferno. The smoke was thick, choking, the air so hot it seared his lungs. But he found her, a young girl, 7 years old, her body small and fragile, lying unconscious on the floor, surrounded by flames that seemed to dance around her, that seemed to reach for her with deliberate intent. Her name was Alessa Gillespie, though Travis would not learn this until later, would not understand what he had stumbled into, what ancient and terrible machinery he had just interrupted. He lifted her, felt how light she was, how her skin was already blistering from the heat, and he carried her out, back through the flames, back into the cold fog where the air was clean and his lungs could pull in breath again. He laid her on the ground, checked for a pulse, for breathing, and found both. Faint but present, the girl was alive. But as he knelt there, as the fire raged behind him and the sirens began to wail in the distance, something changed. The fog seemed to thicken, to press closer, and the quality of the light shifted, became dimmer, colder. Travis looked up and saw that the world had transformed around him. The street was the same, and yet not the same. The pavement was cracked and stained, the buildings decayed and rusting, and the air carried a smell of rot and old blood. This was the other world, though Travis had no name for it yet, no framework to understand what he was seeing. This was the nightmare that lived beneath Silent Hill skin, the place where trauma and guilt and suffering took physical form. He stumbled through this transformed world, driven by instinct, by the need to understand, to find his way back to something real. And as he moved through the twisted streets and the decaying buildings, he encountered them, the manifestations, creatures that should not exist, that defied the laws of nature and sanity. Nurses, their faces hidden behind bandages stained with old blood, their movements jerky and wrong, their hands clutching rusted instruments. They shambled toward him with purpose, with hunger, and Travis, who had never fought anything more dangerous than a bar drunk, found himself fighting for his life. The nurses, we would come to understand, were reflections of Alessa's trauma, her fear of the hospital, of the doctors and nurses who had failed to protect her, who had perhaps been complicit in her suffering. And there were others, creatures wrapped in straitjackets, their bodies contorted, their limbs too long, their movements a grotesque parody of human motion. These were the restraints, the imprisonment, the helplessness of a child who could not escape her tormentors. Every monster Travis encountered was a window into Alessa's pain, a physical manifestation of what had been done to her, what was still being done to her. He found himself drawn to Brookhaven Hospital, that looming structure that had appeared again and again in the town's dark history, that place where so much suffering had occurred, so many secrets had been buried. Inside, the halls were narrow and dark, the walls stained with substances he did not want to identify. The air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and decay. And in the depths of the hospital, in a room that seemed to pulse with malevolence, Travis encountered the butcher. The butcher was massive, a hulking figure draped in a blood-stained apron, its head hidden beneath a crude metal helmet, its hands gripping a blade the size of a man's torso. It moved with terrible purpose, dragging its weapon behind it, the metal scraping against the floor with a sound that set Travis's teeth on edge. This creature, this monstrous thing, was Alessa's fear-given form. Her fear of the men who hurt her, who used her, who saw her not as a child, but as a vessel, a tool for their divine purpose. The butcher was rage and helplessness and trauma made flesh, and it wanted nothing more than to destroy. Travis fought it, barely survived it, and in surviving began to understand that he was not simply trapped in a nightmare. He was trapped in someone else's nightmare, living through the horror of a child's suffering, walking through the landscape of her broken mind. As he explored the town, moving between the fog world and the other world, that place of rust and blood and decay, Travis began to find documents, fragments of the truth scattered like breadcrumbs through the darkness. He learned about the order, the cult that had controlled Silent Hill for generations, that worshipped a deity they believed would bring paradise, would transform the world into something pure and perfect. He learned that this deity, this God they sought, required specific rituals, specific sacrifices, and he learned that Alessa Gillespie, that 7-year-old girl he had pulled from the fire, had been chosen as the vessel for this God's birth. The documents spoke of the 7th ritual, the final ceremony that would impregnate Alessa with the divine essence, that would force her young body to carry and nurture this entity until it was ready to be born into the world. The process, Travis read with growing horror, involved immense pain, unimaginable suffering. Alessa would be kept alive through the pregnancy, kept conscious, her agony serving as the fuel for the god's gestation. The fire, he realized, had not been an accident. Dahlia Gillespie, Alessa's own mother, had started it, had locked her daughter in that house and set it ablaze, believing that the flames would purify Alessa, would prepare her body for the divine purpose, would burn away everything human and leave only the vessel. Travis also found pieces of an artifact called the Floros, a strange device that the cult had used to control demons, to bind supernatural forces to their will. The Floros was scattered, broken into fragments and hidden throughout the town, and Travis, guided by instinct or perhaps by something deeper, collected these pieces, reassembled them. The device pulsed with a cold energy, and Travis understood, without knowing how he understood, that this artifact could contain the god, could trap it before it fully manifested. His search led him inevitably back to Dahlia Gillespie. He found her in the ruins of her burned home, standing among the ashes, her face calm, almost serene. She did not run from him, did not hide her role in what had happened. Instead, she spoke to him with the certainty of a true believer, explained that Alessa's suffering was necessary, was holy, that the pain of one child was a small price to pay for the salvation of the world, that the God would bring paradise, would end all suffering, and that Dahlia's role as the mother who delivered the vessel was the highest honor she could achieve. Travis, listening to her speak, felt something break inside him, some final barrier between the ordinary world he had known and this nightmare he had stumbled into. Dahlia's love for her daughter, if it had ever existed, had been consumed entirely by her faith, by her devotion to the order and its promises. She had sacrificed Alessa not despite being her mother, but because she was her mother, because she believed that was what true faith demanded, And in that moment, as Travis stood before Dahlia in the ashes of her crime, something happened that neither of them fully understood. The ritual, interrupted by Travis's rescue, had not been completed as planned. Alessa's soul, subjected to such trauma, such violation, had fractured. Part of it had split away, seeking escape, seeking any refuge from the agony. And this fragment, this piece of Alessa's soul, manifested as a separate entity. A baby girl, newborn and crying, appearing in the burned house as if conjured from nothing. Dahlia took the infant, held it with something that might have been wonder or might have been calculation, and spoke a name. Cheryl Mason. This child, this soul fragment, would be taken far from Silent Hill, would be given to a family who knew nothing of the town's darkness, who would raise her as their own. And perhaps Dahlia believed this was mercy, this separation. Perhaps she believed she was saving part of her daughter. Or perhaps she simply saw it as a complication, a variable to be managed later. Travis, exhausted and traumatized, used the fluoros as the ritual reached its terrible climax. The device flared with light, and the god, that entity that had been growing inside Alessa, was contained, trapped before it could fully manifest. The ritual was incomplete. The birth was prevented, at least for now. But Alessa herself, the original, the vessel, had been too damaged by the fire, too broken by the ritual. Her body was covered in burns, her skin charred and blistered, her pain beyond anything medicine could truly address. She was taken to Alchemilla Hospital, to a room deep in its halls, where she was placed in a bed and connected to machines that kept her body alive. Her mind retreated into itself, into a comatose state, where perhaps the pain was distant, where perhaps she could dream of escape. But she did not die, could not die. The ritual, though incomplete, had changed her, had bound her to the god she carried, and she would remain in that hospital bed, trapped between life and death, her suffering continuing in silence for years to come. Travis left Silent Hill that night, drove away in his damaged truck, tried to convince himself that what he had experienced was trauma, was shock, was anything but real. But the town had marked him, had left its fingerprints on his soul, and Alessa remained a child in eternal agony, waiting in the darkness, her fractured soul split between two bodies, her nightmare seeping into the very foundations of Silent Hill, transforming it slowly into a reflection of her pain. We're drifting slowly into the timeline of Silent Hill, a tangled web of forgotten trauma and lingering guilt that began with a town's dark history, only to unravel into something of haunted reflections and unending psychological torment. Born in the quiet corners of American suburbia, where families sought peace and solace, it grew into a nexus of fear, a place where the veil between worlds thinned. But beneath the surface, something darker always whispered. This is the story of how a town's hidden past became a chronicle of souls trapped in their own minds, and how one man's search for truth still echoes in whispers through the quiet hours. Born in the quiet hours of 1976, we first stepped into the fog-shrouded streets with Harry Mason, a man whose life was irrevocably altered by a car crash, a missing daughter, and the insidious pull of Silent Hill. His desperate search for Cheryl led him through the town's crumbling facades, past its grotesque denizens, and into the heart of its dark mysteries. The cult of the town, the ancient rituals, the tragic fate of Alessa Gillespie. All these threads wove into a tapestry of horror that, for a time, seemed to conclude with Harry's escape, Cheryl's rescue, and the town's burning. But the echoes of Silent Hill are not so easily silenced. They linger, they twist, they reshape themselves, waiting for new minds to ensnare, new traumas to exploit. And so, we move forward, not in a linear fashion, but into a fractured reflection, a dream within a dream, as we arrive at an alternate timeline in the quiet hours of the 1990s. This is where the story of Silent Hill, Shattered Memories, begins, not as a direct continuation, but as a reimagining, a psychological deconstruction of the original narrative, filtered through the lens of memory and grief. Here, the familiar narrative beats are replayed, but with a chilling, introspective twist. Our journey starts once more with Harry Mason, his voice a familiar, weary whisper, as he searches for his missing daughter, Cheryl, after a car crash. Yet, even from the outset, something feels subtly amiss, a disquieting chill that has nothing to do with the biting cold of the town. This Harry is different. He is more vulnerable, more introspective, his quest imbued with a profound sense of loss that permeates the very air he breathes. The car crash, a pivotal moment in the original story, is revisited, but its aftermath is steeped in an unsettling ambiguity. We, as observers, are immediately drawn into a series of psychological profiling sessions with a mysterious figure known only as Dr. K. These sessions, interspersed throughout Harry's journey, serve as a meta-narrative device, a lens through which the player's own choices and perceptions are analyzed. Dr. K asks probing questions. Questions about our fears, our desires, our relationships, subtly shaping the narrative around our responses. It is a brilliant, unsettling conceit, blurring the line between player and protagonist, making us complicit in Harry's unfolding reality. As Harry steps out of the doctor's office, or perhaps out of a dream, he finds himself in a Silent Hill transformed. The familiar fog is replaced by a desolate, frozen landscape, its streets choked with ice and snow, reflecting a profound sense of desolation and decay. This is not the Silent Hill of crumbling brick and rusted metal, but one encased in a crystalline, suffocating silence. The cold bites, a physical manifestation of the emotional chill that has settled deep within Harry's soul. It is in these frigid streets that he first encounters the twisted manifestations of the town's darkness, the raw shocks. These creatures, unlike the grotesque, often symbolic monsters of previous iterations, are amorphous, faceless beings, their bodies shifting and melting like ice, their movements frantic and desperate. They are not merely physical threats. They are embodiments of Harry's own repressed anxieties, his fears, his guilt, made manifest in a chilling, visceral form. They pursue him relentlessly, not with brute force, but with an unnerving, almost predatory intelligence, forcing him to flee, to hide, to survive. Amidst this frozen nightmare, Harry receives calls and messages from a mysterious woman named Michelle Valdez. He believes her to be a former girlfriend, a phantom from a past that seems increasingly elusive. Her voice, though warm, carries an undertone of melancholy, a sense of something lost and unrecoverable. She offers him guidance, hints, and a fleeting sense of connection in a world that feels utterly alien. Yet even her presence is tinged with the same unsettling ambiguity that permeates the entire experience. Is she real? A memory? Another facet of Harry's fractured psyche? The game leaves these questions hanging, allowing the player to grapple with the uncomfortable uncertainty. His journey continues, and in his desperate search, Harry encounters Sybil Bennet, a police officer. Unlike her stern, unwavering portrayal in the original game, this Sybil is initially suspicious, her gaze sharp, her questions pointed. She sees Harry as a potential threat, or at the very least, a deeply disturbed individual. Her skepticism is a mirror to the player's own growing unease, a reflection of the narrative's constant questioning of Harry's perception of reality. However, as the story unfolds, her demeanor softens, and she attempts to help him, her actions driven by a sense of duty, perhaps even a flicker of empathy. Her presence, too, is a distorted echo, a familiar face in an unfamiliar world, reminding us of the original narrative while simultaneously subverting its expectations. The town itself is a character, a living, breathing entity that reflects Harry's inner turmoil. The ice and snow, the constant chill, are not merely environmental details. They are metaphors for Harry's fractured memories, his emotional numbness, the way his past has been frozen in time, inaccessible and painful. Every building, every street, every alley is steeped in this pervasive cold, a stark contrast to the often fiery, hellish landscapes of other Silent Hill entries. This is a Silent Hill of internal winter, a psychological landscape sculpted by grief. As Harry navigates this frigid labyrinth, he encounters distorted versions of other familiar characters and monsters. These are not exact replicas, but rather echoes, reflections, twisted by the lens of his own mind. The raw shocks, as mentioned, are the primary antagonists, their relentless pursuit a constant reminder of Harry's internal struggles. They are faceless, formless, representing the universal anxieties that plague him, the fear of the unknown, the terror of confronting his own hidden truths. He frequently revisits his old house, a place that should offer solace, but instead provides only further disarray and fragmented memories. The house is a physical manifestation of his mind, its rooms cluttered with forgotten objects, its walls echoing with whispers of a past that is just out of reach. Each visit is a descent deeper into his own subconscious, a desperate attempt to piece together what was lost, to understand the truth of his absence. The objects he finds, the photographs, the trinkets, are not just props. They are anchors to a reality that is slowly slipping away, clues in a puzzle that only Harry can solve. Later in his journey, he meets Lisa Garland, a nurse, another familiar face from the original. But this Lisa is not the tragic, drug-addicted figure we remember. Here, she is portrayed as a troubled and seductive presence, her allure tinged with a desperate vulnerability. She is a siren, drawing Harry deeper into the town's mysteries, her story intertwining with his in unexpected ways. Her character, like all others in Shattered Memories, is a reflection, a possibility of what might have been, or what Harry believes her to be, further blurring the lines between reality and perception. And then, the truth, the shattering revelation that recontextualizes everything that has come before. It is revealed that Harry Mason died in the car crash years ago. The entire experience, the frozen town, the psychological profiling, The desperate search for Cheryl, the encounters with distorted characters and relentless monsters. All of it is a coping mechanism. It is Cheryl's coping mechanism. Cheryl, now an adult, is the patient of Dr. K, and the game's events are her therapeutic reconstruction of her father's memory. This twist, delivered with a quiet, devastating impact, shifts the entire narrative from a horror story about a town to a profound exploration of grief, memory, and the human psyche. Harry's journey is not his own, but a projection of Cheryl's unresolved trauma, her desperate attempt to come to terms with her father's death. The raw shocks are her anxieties, her fears about her father, her guilt. The frozen silent hill is her emotional landscape, a world where time has stopped, where grief has encased everything in ice. The choices the player made during the psychological profiling sessions, the subtle ways they shaped Harry's personality, were in fact shaping Cheryl's perception of her father, her memory of him. This revelation transforms shattered memories from a simple horror game into a poignant, deeply personal narrative about loss and healing. It asks us to consider the power of memory, the ways we construct and reconstruct our pasts, and the profound impact of grief on the human mind. Harry Mason, the hero we thought we knew, becomes a spectral figure, a beloved ghost, his story told not by himself, but by the daughter who loved him, and who, through this therapeutic journey, finally begins to let him go. It is a testament to the enduring power of Silent Hill, its ability to delve not just into the supernatural, but into the darkest, most intimate corners of the human heart. The echoes of this shattered memory linger, a reminder that some truths are too painful to confront directly and must instead be approached through the labyrinthine pathways of the mind. We drift now, a breath held in the silent space between timelines, from the fractured reflections of shattered memories into the true original fog of Silent Hill as it descended upon us in 1998. It is here, in these quiet hours, that the true story of this haunted town begins to unravel, a narrative woven from grief, obsession, and the dark, beating heart of a cult's desire. Our journey into this nascent horror begins with Harry Mason, a man whose life until this point had been one of quiet normalcy, perhaps even contentment. He was simply a father, a devoted guardian to his adopted daughter, Cheryl. Their vacation, a simple drive through the scenic routes, was meant to be a respite, a moment of shared joy before the world's mundane rhythms resumed. But fate, or perhaps something far more sinister, had other plans. As their car, a vessel of innocent intention, drew near the town of Silent Hill, a sudden, blinding apparition, a shadowy figure in the road, forced Harry to swerve. The screech of tires, the crumpling metal, the shattering glass, all coalesced into a violent symphony that marked their unwitting entry into a nightmare. When the world righted itself, when the ringing in Harry's ears subsided, he found himself amidst the wreckage, battered and disoriented, but alive. Yet a far more profound horror awaited him. Cheryl, his beloved daughter, was gone, vanished into the thick, oppressive fog that had, in the wake of the crash, swallowed the town whole. Harry, driven by a primal paternal instinct, stumbled from the wreckage, his mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. The fog, a living, breathing entity, pressed in on him, muffling sound, distorting vision, and stealing the very sense of direction. It was a suffocating shroud, a physical manifestation of the town's insidious nature. He called out Cheryl's name, his voice raw with desperation, but only the silence, broken by the distant, disembodied cries of unseen things, answered him. His search, initially frantic and undirected, soon gained a semblance of purpose, albeit a terrifying one. He found a child's drawing, a crude but unmistakable depiction of Cheryl, clutched in the hand of a grotesque winged creature that scuttled through the alleyways. This was his first true encounter with the town's monstrous inhabitants, a chilling prelude to the horrors that lay ahead. As he wandered, lost in the labyrinthine streets, Harry stumbled upon a cryptic note. It was not a message of comfort nor a plea for help, but an enigmatic directive to otherworld. Accompanying these unsettling words was a crudely drawn map, its lines leading him, with an almost supernatural pull, towards Midwich Elementary School. This seemingly innocuous institution, a place meant for learning and growth, would soon reveal itself as a gateway, a place where the veil between realities was thin, almost transparent. The school, when he finally reached it, was not as he remembered such places to be. It was dark, deserted, and permeated by a palpable sense of dread. The classrooms were filled with unsettling echoes, the corridors stretched into an oppressive infinity, and the air itself felt heavy with unspoken horrors. It was here, amidst the decaying innocence of a forgotten school, that Harry's journey into the true heart of Silent Hill began in earnest. Within the shadowed halls of Midwich, Harry encountered Dahlia Gillespie, an elderly woman whose eyes held the wisdom of ages and the madness of devotion. She spoke in riddles, her voice a reedy whisper that seemed to carry the weight of the town's ancient secrets. She spoke of darkness, of a coming judgment, and of a mark of Samael, a symbol of the demonic entity that the town's cult, the Order, worshipped. Dahlia, with her unsettling pronouncements and her unwavering belief in the town's spiritual significance, became a reluctant guide, her cryptic words often pointing Harry towards the truth, even as her motives remained shrouded in shadow. She was a figure of both aid and menace, a living embodiment of Silent Hill's dual nature. Her presence was a constant reminder that the town's horrors were not merely random occurrences, but rather the manifestations of a deeply rooted ancient evil, meticulously cultivated by human hands. As Harry delved deeper into the town's mysteries, he encountered Sybil Bennett, a police officer from the neighboring town of Brahms. Unlike Harry, Sybil was a woman of action, her uniform a stark contrast to the ethereal horror surrounding them. She too had been drawn into Silent Hill's web, investigating a series of strange occurrences that had led her to the fog-shrouded streets. Her initial skepticism, a natural defense against the impossible, slowly eroded as she witnessed the town's grotesque realities. Sybil became Harry's reluctant ally, her pragmatic approach a counterpoint to his emotional desperation. Together, they navigated the increasingly surreal landscape, their shared purpose a fragile bond against the encroaching madness. Her presence offered a glimmer of hope, a connection to the world outside, even as Silent Hill sought to sever all such ties. The journey then led Harry to Alchemilla Hospital, a place that should have offered solace and healing, but instead presented another layer of the town's unsettling reality. Here, he met Lisa Garland, a nurse whose beauty was marred by a haunting fragility. Lisa suffered from profound memory loss, her past a fragmented tapestry of forgotten horrors. She was also afflicted by a strange, debilitating illness, her body slowly succumbing to an unknown malady. Lisa, with her gentle demeanor and her tragic vulnerability, became a poignant figure in Harry's quest. She offered him fleeting moments of comfort and crucial pieces of information, even as her own grasp on reality began to slip. Her story, a testament to the town's insidious corruption, hinted at a deeper, more personal tragedy intertwined with Silent Hill's dark history. She was a victim, a pawn, and a witness, her presence a constant reminder of the human cost of the town's evil. It was through these encounters, through the whispers of Dahlia, the pragmatic observations of Sybil, and the tragic confessions of Lisa, that Harry began to piece together the horrifying truth about Silent Hill. He learned of the Order, the town's pervasive cult, a shadowy organization that had, for generations, manipulated and exploited the town's spiritual energies for their own dark purposes. Their ultimate goal, a blasphemous ambition, was the resurrection of their god, a malevolent deity whose coming would usher in an era of eternal darkness. Central to this twisted prophecy was Alessa Gillespie, a young girl of immense psychic power, a being whose very existence was a conduit for the cult's malevolent rituals. The revelations continued, each more shocking than the last. Harry discovered that Cheryl, his beloved daughter, was not merely a missing child, but a reincarnation of Alessa. The truth, when it finally emerged, was a tale of unspeakable cruelty. Years prior, Dahlia, driven by her fanatical devotion to the Order, had orchestrated a ritualistic burning, attempting to sacrifice Alessa to hasten the birth of their god. But Alessa, with her extraordinary psychic abilities, had resisted, her pure, untainted soul splitting into two beings. One part, the innocent and untainted essence, was reborn as Cheryl, adopted by Harry. The other, the tormented and suffering spirit, remained within Silent Hill, a vessel of immense power and unimaginable pain, fueling the town's descent into a nightmare. Harry's search for his daughter was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a desperate race against time to prevent the complete resurrection of a malevolent deity and to reunite the fractured soul of a child. As the truth solidified, so too did the town's physical manifestations of horror intensify. Harry found himself navigating the other world, a nightmarish reflection of Silent Hill, where familiar locations twisted into grotesque parodies of their former selves. The school, the hospital, the streets themselves, all became canvases for the town's inner demons, their surfaces peeling away to reveal rusted metal, blood-stained walls, and pulsating organic matter. Here, the monsters were no longer mere shadows. They were tangible, horrifying entities, each a twisted manifestation of Alessa's pain, the town's corruption, and the cult's dark rituals. Harry, armed with only a handful of weapons and his unwavering determination, faced these abominations, solving intricate puzzles that served as gateways to further truths, each step bringing him closer to the heart of the town's darkness. The other world was a constant, suffocating presence, a relentless assault on his sanity, forcing him to confront not only the physical horrors, but also the psychological torment that Silent Hill so expertly wielded. His arduous journey culminated in the nowhere dimension, a place beyond the physical and the other world, a realm of pure, unadulterated psychic energy. It was here, in this ethereal void, that Harry confronted the god, an incomplete deity manifested from a lesser suffering and the cult's relentless rituals. This was not a fully formed entity, but rather a nascent, writhing mass of malevolence, its power immense but still vulnerable. The confrontation was not merely a battle of strength, but a struggle for the very soul of the town, and indeed for the fate of his own daughter. Harry, with the aid of the enigmatic Floros, a device given to him by Dahlia, and the combined psychic energies of Alessa and Cheryl, managed to defeat this nascent deity, preventing its full manifestation and averting a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The victory was hard won, a testament to a father's love against impossible odds. As the nowhere dimension began to crumble, and the monstrous god dissolved into nothingness, Harry escaped Silent Hill, not empty-handed, but with a precious, fragile burden. In his arms, he carried a reborn infant, a fragment of Alessa and Cheryl, a pure and untainted soul, given a second chance at life. He named her Heather Mason, a symbol of hope amidst the ashes of despair, a promise of a future untainted by the horrors they had endured. Silent Hill, in its wake, left a scar, a wound that would never fully heal. But Harry had emerged, a survivor, a protector, and a testament to the enduring power of love in the face of unimaginable evil. The fog began to lift, slowly, reluctantly, as if the town itself was mourning its defeat, its dark reign temporarily quelled. Harry, with Heather in his arms, walked away from the nightmare, leaving the echoes of the town's suffering to whisper in the quiet hours, a constant reminder of the darkness that had once consumed it. 17 years have now drifted past, the rust and fog of Silent Hill settling, yet never truly fading. We find ourselves in the early 2000s, far from the town's oppressive grasp, in the seemingly ordinary life of a young woman named Heather Mason. She is, unbeknownst to her, the reincarnation of Alessa Gillespie, the child who suffered so profoundly, the vessel for the very entity that sought to be born. Harry Mason, her adoptive father, rescued her, and together they forged a quiet existence in Portland, a life built on a foundation of love and careful anonymity. He had shielded her, nurtured her, and for 17 years she lived as a typical teenager, her past a forgotten nightmare, buried deep beneath layers of normalcy. Yet the echoes of Silent Hill are tenacious. They cling to those touched by its shadow, and even across vast distances its tendrils begin to reach. The illusion of peace begins to fray within the bustling confines of the Central Square shopping centre, a mundane monument to consumerism, a stark contrast to the decaying streets of Silent Hill. Heather, immersed in the everyday anxieties of teenage life, is first approached by Douglas Cartland, a weary, aging private investigator. His presence is a subtle tremor, a hint of something unsettling beneath the surface of her ordinary day. He speaks of a missing person, a father's plea, a case that seems innocuous enough. But then another figure emerges from the periphery, a woman named Claudia Wolfe. Her eyes hold a fervent, almost fanatical light, her words laced with an unsettling conviction. Claudia speaks of a coming paradise, of a God to be born, and her gaze upon Heather is one of profound, almost predatory recognition. It is a moment of disquieting revelation, a crack in the carefully constructed facade of Heather's life. Claudia's words, though cryptic, resonate with an ancient, dark power, stirring something deep within Heather's forgotten memories, a faint, unsettling hum. Douglas, though initially appearing as a conventional PI, soon reveals his true purpose. Having been hired by Claudia to locate Heather, inadvertently drawing her back into the very nightmare Harry had fought so desperately to escape. The quiet hours of Heather's life are shattered irrevocably when she returns to her apartment, a sanctuary that quickly transforms into a scene of unspeakable horror. Harry Mason, her protector, her father, lies dead, a victim of Claudia Wolf's zealous cult. This act of brutal violence is not merely a murder. It is a calculated sacrifice, a chilling declaration of intent. Claudia, driven by a twisted vision of salvation, believes Harry's death will fuel Heather's anger, her hatred, and in doing so, nurture the nascent god within her. This horrific event serves as the catalyst, ripping away the last vestiges of Heather's ordinary life, forcing her to confront the terrifying reality of her heritage. The grief, the shock, the profound sense of loss, these emotions are raw and overwhelming, yet they are also the very ingredients Claudia seeks to cultivate. In the wake of this tragedy, the veil begins to lift, and Heather's true identity, a complex tapestry woven from the souls of Alessa Gillespie and Cheryl Mason, starts to unravel. The cult's relentless pursuit, their fervent pronouncements, begin to piece together a horrifying truth. Heather is not merely a girl. She is the vessel, the chosen one, destined to birth their God. This God, in their distorted scripture, is meant to cleanse the world, to usher in a new era, a paradise born from suffering. The cult, a splintered remnant of the original order, believes that only through intense pain and spiritual anguish can the deity be brought forth. Heather, in her essence, carries the spiritual imprint of Alessa, the child whose trauma was used to conceive the entity in the first place, and the innocent soul of Cheryl, Harry's adopted daughter from the first Silent Hill, who absorbed half of Alessa's soul. These two souls, now merged within Heather, make her the perfect, albeit unwilling, incubator for the cult's apocalyptic vision. With Harry's death as a grim compass, Heather is inexorably drawn back to Silent Hill, the town that birthed her spiritual lineage. As she navigates its fog-choked streets and decaying buildings, the town itself becomes a living nightmare, a manifestation of her deepest fears and fragmented memories. Each grotesque monster she encounters, each unsettling vision, is a reflection of her subconscious, a twisted echo of Alessa's pain, Cheryl's innocence, and her own burgeoning dread. The creatures are not merely physical threats. They are psychological tormentors, embodying the trauma, the guilt, and the horror that permeate the town. The very air is thick with the weight of past suffering, and Heather, now fully immersed in this psychological landscape, begins to understand the profound connection she shares with this cursed place. The town, in its malevolent way, is reawakening the memories she had suppressed for so long, forcing her to confront the very essence of her being. Within the labyrinthine depths of Silent Hill, Heather confronts Claudia and Vincent Smith, two pivotal figures in the cult's fractured hierarchy. From their strained interactions and conflicting ideologies, Heather begins to piece together the intricate and often contradictory history of the cult. She learns of its schism, the diverging interpretations of their sacred texts, and the bitter resentments that simmer beneath the surface. Claudia, consumed by a messianic fervor, believes that only through suffering and the birth of their God can humanity be saved from its own inherent corruption. Her motivations, though twisted, stem from a profound, albeit misguided desire for a better world, a world free from the pain she herself endured. Vincent, on the other hand, presents a more pragmatic, almost cynical perspective. He reveals the true nature of the God, a malevolent entity, not a benevolent savior, and exposes the flaws in Claudia's rigid, fanatical interpretation of their scriptures. He sees Claudia's zealotry as a dangerous delusion, a path that will lead not to paradise, but to further destruction. Their conflict highlights the inherent dangers of blind faith and the corrupting influence of power, even when wielded with the best of intentions. It is through these encounters, these tense dialogues, that Heather uncovers the full extent of Claudia's plan. She learns that Claudia intends to use her, Heather, as the ultimate vessel for the God. Her unique connection to Alessa, the original mother of the deity, and the lingering presence of the fetus within her, make her the perfect unwilling host. Claudia believes that by forcing Heather to endure immense emotional and physical pain, she can accelerate the birth of this entity, thereby ushering in her promised paradise. The God is not a literal child, but a spiritual entity, a being of immense power, born from the collective suffering and darkness of humanity, channeled through Alessa's trauma and now Heather's grief. The cult's rituals, their sacrifices, and their relentless pursuit of Heather are all designed to cultivate the ideal conditions for this unholy birth. Vincent, in a moment of desperate clarity, reveals the chilling truth. The cult's God is not a benevolent deity, despite Claudia's fervent beliefs. He exposes the inherent malevolence of the entity, a force that seeks not salvation, but destruction and rebirth through suffering. He meticulously dismantles Claudia's distorted interpretation of their scriptures, revealing how her own trauma and desires have warped the original teachings. Vincent, though a member of the cult, maintains a degree of intellectual honesty, recognizing the dangerous path Claudia is treading. He understands that the paradise Claudia envisions will be a hell for humanity, a world reshaped by a cruel and indifferent power. His revelations serve as a crucial turning point for Heather, solidifying her resolve to resist the cult and prevent the birth of this monstrous God. In a desperate bid to thwart Claudia's plans, Vincent provides Heather with a vital tool, the aglaophotis. This mysterious substance, often described as a red liquid or a crystalline powder, is a powerful anti-demonic agent capable of expelling or severely weakening demonic entities. Its origins are shrouded in the cult's ancient lore, a closely guarded secret passed down through generations. Vincent explains its properties, emphasizing its potential to disrupt the birthing process of the god or to weaken it after its emergence. The aglaophotis represents a glimmer of hope, a tangible weapon against an intangible horror, offering Heather a fighting chance against the overwhelming power of the cult and the entity it seeks to unleash. It is a desperate measure, but one that offers the only plausible path to salvation. The climax of Heather's harrowing journey arrives when the god is finally birthed from her, a grotesque and terrifying manifestation of the cult's dark desires. The birthing is not a gentle process, but a violent, agonizing expulsion, a testament to the entity's malevolent nature. However, armed with the Aglaophotis, Heather confronts the newly born deity. With a surge of courage and determination, she uses the substance, weakening the god and rendering it vulnerable. This act of defiance, this rejection of the cult's twisted prophecy, allows her to ultimately defeat the entity, preventing its full realization and the apocalyptic future Claudia envisioned. It is a moment of profound triumph, not just over a monstrous entity, but over the insidious influence of a cult that sought to control her destiny. In the aftermath of this cataclysmic confrontation, Heather makes a conscious and profound choice. She chooses to live. This decision is not merely about survival. It is about breaking the cycle of suffering, of vengeance, and of the cult's enduring influence. She rejects the path of perpetual victimhood and embraces a future free from the shadows of Silent Hill. As a symbolic act of reclaiming her identity and forging a new beginning, she adopts the name Cheryl, honoring the innocent child who was once a part of her, and in doing so, fully embracing the legacy of Harry Mason, the man who loved her unconditionally. This final act signifies a profound transformation, a triumph of the human spirit over overwhelming darkness, and a promise that the echoes of Silent Hill, though they may linger, will no longer define her. The cycle is broken, the god vanquished, and a new life, however scarred, begins to emerge from the pervasive fog. We're drifting slowly into the timeline of Silent Hill, a tangled web of forgotten sins and psychic echoes that began with the town's quiet history, only to unravel into something of haunted shadows and unending horror. Born in the unassuming mists of New England, where ancient rituals brought forth dark deities to delight cultists, it grew into a chain of shattered realities filled with whispers and dread. But beneath the fog, something darker lurked. This is the story of how a simple vision for spiritual awakening became a chronicle of souls trapped in purgatory, and how one town's curse still echoes in whispers through the quiet hours. We move now, a short time later, into the year 2001, where a new, deeply personal tragedy unfolds within the town's suffocating embrace. This is the story of James Sunderland, a man adrift in the wake of an unbearable loss, drawn back to the very place where his deepest wounds lie hidden. The journey begins, as so many do in Silent Hill, with a letter, an impossible missive from his wife Mary, who had 3 years prior succumbed to a terminal illness. Her words, penned in a familiar hand, beckon him to their special place in Silent Hill, a place filled with cherished memories, a place now shrouded in the town's oppressive fog. It is a plea, a whisper from beyond the veil, or perhaps a cruel trick of the mind, born from grief and longing. James, a man burdened by an unspoken weight, finds himself compelled to answer this spectral call. He drives, a silent journey through the encroaching darkness, until his car rests at the edge of Toluca Lake, overlooking the silent, shrouded town. It is from this observation deck, a place of quiet contemplation, that he first steps into the nightmare, the mist-laden streets stretching out before him, a labyrinth of personal torment. The air itself seems to hum with a low, disquieting energy, a prelude to the horrors that await. As he ventures deeper into the town's decaying heart, he encounters figures who are not quite what they seem, echoes of his own fractured psyche. There is Maria, a woman of striking, almost unsettling resemblance to Mary, yet imbued with a provocative, almost predatory allure. Her presence is a constant, unsettling mirror, reflecting James's repressed desires and his desperate longing for what he has lost. She appears, vanishes, and reappears, a tormenting siren, a living embodiment of the temptations and guilt that gnaw at his soul. Then there is Laura, a young girl, seemingly oblivious to the town's pervasive horror, who taunts James with cryptic remarks about Mary, hinting at a past he desperately tries to outrun. Her innocence, or perhaps her willful ignorance, only serves to deepen the unsettling atmosphere. Angela Orozco, a woman haunted by her own unspeakable past, drifts through the town like a ghost, her despair a palpable shroud, her story a stark reflection of the town's power to magnify personal suffering. And Eddie Dombrowski, a portly, insecure man, driven to violence by his own deep-seated insecurities and the town's insidious influence, becomes a twisted mirror reflecting James's own buried rage and self-loathing. Each encounter is a piece of a larger, more horrifying puzzle. Each character a manifestation of the town's ability to prey on the deepest recesses of the human mind. It is in the decaying corridors of the Woodside apartments that James first confronts the most iconic and terrifying manifestation of his guilt, Pyramid Head. This hulking, faceless executioner, with its massive triangular helmet and its great sword, is not merely a monster, but a symbolic representation of James's desire for punishment, his need to atone for an unspeakable act. Pyramid Head's relentless pursuit, its brutal, methodical violence, is a constant, visceral reminder of the judgment James believes he deserves. Its appearance, often accompanied by the grotesque mannequin creatures, further underscores the sexual repression and violent impulses festering within James's subconscious. James's journey through Silent Hill is not linear. It is a cyclical descent, a revisiting of familiar places that have been twisted and corrupted by his own psychological state. Brookhaven Hospital, once a place of healing, becomes a sterile, horrifying monument to Mary's suffering and James's inability to save her. The Silent Hill Historical Society, a repository of the town's past, transforms into a labyrinth of decaying memories, each artifact a painful echo of what was and what could have been. These locations warp and shift, their architecture reflecting the crumbling edifice of James's mind, their inhabitants a grotesque pantomime of his inner turmoil. The town itself is a living, breathing entity, a sentient mirror reflecting the darkest corners of his soul. The truth, when it finally surfaces, is a devastating blow. Deep within the Lakeview Hotel, a place once filled with tender memories, James discovers a videotape. This grainy, flickering recording reveals the unimaginable, the final moments of Mary's life. Not a peaceful passing, but a deliberate act. It shows James, in a moment of unbearable compassion, or perhaps desperate release, smothering his terminally ill wife with a pillow. The revelation shatters the carefully constructed facade of his grief, exposing the raw, ugly truth of his actions. The letter, he realizes, was never from Mary. It was a desperate plea from his own subconscious, a manifestation of his overwhelming guilt, a final, desperate attempt to seek forgiveness, or perhaps to deny the undeniable. the encounters with Maria become increasingly fraught with symbolic meaning. Each time she dies, only to reappear later, unharmed. It is a cruel testament to James's inability to let go of Mary's memory, his desperate clinging to an idealized image, and his struggle with the carnal desires that now war with his grief. Maria is both a comfort and a torment, a reflection of James's conflicting emotions, a living embodiment of the psychological prison he has constructed for himself. Her repeated demises are not literal deaths, but rather the shattering of illusions, the painful process of confronting the truth about his desires and his past. The prison, a stark and brutal environment, brings forth a new horror, a deeper exploration of the town's power to manifest trauma. Here, James confronts two abstract daddies, monstrous creatures that represent Angela Orozco's horrific past, her father's abuse, and her own profound despair. These creatures are not James's demons, but Angela's, a stark reminder that Silent Hill preys on all who enter its borders, twisting their personal hells into tangible, terrifying forms. James's struggle against them is an act of empathy, a brief moment where his own suffering is overshadowed by the profound anguish of another. The climax of James's journey, his final confrontation, takes place back in the Lakeview Hotel, a place now irrevocably stained by his memories. Here, he faces off against two manifestations of Mary, or perhaps Maria in Mary's form, each a grotesque distortion of the woman he loved. These are not physical battles, but psychological ones, a final, desperate struggle against his guilt, his grief, and the profound sorrow that has consumed him. The nature of these final forms, whether they are idealized, vengeful, or simply reflections of his tormented mind, is left to the player's interpretation, a testament to the ambiguity that permeates Silent Hill. The ending of James's story is not a singular, definitive conclusion, but a reflection of his psychological state, a mirror held up to the player's own choices and interpretations. There are multiple outcomes, each dependent on James's actions throughout his journey, his treatment of other characters, and his ultimate acceptance or denial of his actions. Does he find a measure of peace, choosing to accept his guilt and move forward? Does he succumb to despair, forever trapped in the town's purgatorial embrace? Or does he attempt to resurrect Mary, clinging to a desperate, impossible hope? The ambiguity of the endings underscores the profound psychological depth of Silent Hill 2, leaving the player to ponder the true nature of forgiveness, grief, and the enduring power of guilt. James's story is a chilling testament to the town's ability to force individuals to confront their deepest, most unspeakable truths, offering no easy answers, only the stark, unsettling reality of the human condition. We're drifting slowly into the timeline of Silent Hill, a tangled web of forgotten memories and quiet tragedies that began with a town's dark past, only to unravel into something of haunted shadows and unending horror. Born in the unassuming mists of New England, where ancient rituals brought forth a pantheon of dark gods to delight cultists, it grew into a chain of personal hells filled with guilt and suffering. But beneath the fog, something darker lurked. This is the story of how a simple vision for spiritual awakening became a chronicle of souls trapped in torment, and how one man's obsession still echoes in whispers through the quiet hours. Born in the unassuming diners of the 1970s, where springlock suits, brought golden bears and rabbits to life to delight children, it grew into a chain of pizzerias filled with songs and laughter. But beneath the stages, something darker lurked. This is the story of how a simple vision for family fun became a chronicle of souls trapped in metal, and how one man's obsession still echoes in whispers through the quiet hours. We move now, gently, into the year 2004, where the town's insidious influence stretches beyond its misty borders, reaching into the seemingly mundane existence of Henry Townshend, a quiet man living in South Ashfield. Henry finds himself inexplicably trapped within his own apartment, room 302, a place that should be a sanctuary, but has become a prison. The windows are sealed, the door bolted from the inside with chains that were never there before, and the phone lines are dead. Days bleed into one another, marked only by the growing despair and the strange, unsettling noises that emanate from the very walls. The outside world, once a comfort, now feels impossibly distant, a fading memory just beyond his reach. This sudden, inexplicable isolation is the first tremor, a subtle hint that the fabric of reality around him has begun to fray. In his growing desperation, searching for any escape, any explanation, Henry discovers a grotesque, pulsating hole in his bathroom wall. It is an impossible opening, a void that seems to defy the very laws of physics, leading not to the pipes or plaster one would expect, but into a swirling darkness. Driven by a primal need to understand, to escape, he enters. This is his unwilling passage into a fragmented, nightmarish version of the world, a series of alternate dimensions that are both familiar and terrifyingly alien. His first destination is a distorted subway station, a place of echoing emptiness and unsettling silence, where the usual bustle of commuters is replaced by the lingering dread of something unseen. It is in this desolate subway realm that Henry encounters Cynthia Barmore, a woman who is both alluring and deeply troubled. She is a victim, one of many, caught in the terrifying web of Walter Sullivan, a name that will soon come to haunt Henry's every waking moment. Cynthia, a woman seeking a thrill, a new experience, finds only terror and a brutal end. Henry is forced to witness her horrifying demise, a violent act that solidifies the reality of his predicament and the malevolent force at play. Her death is a chilling introduction to the ritualistic nature of Walter's crimes, a grim foreshadowing of the horrors that await. As Henry navigates these fractured realities, more of these mysterious holes appear, acting as grotesque portals, each leading him deeper into the twisted narrative. These are not random occurrences. They are carefully orchestrated passages, drawing him further into Silent Hill's pervasive influence, even though he is geographically distant from the town itself. Each dimension he enters is a nightmarish reflection of a real-world location, imbued with a palpable sense of dread and decay. These are not merely alternate versions of places. They are manifestations of Walter Sullivan's twisted psyche, his memories, and his dark desires, stitched together by the town's pervasive spiritual energy. In one such dimension, a chilling forest world, Henry encounters Andrew DeSalvo, another of Walter's victims. Andrew, a former superintendent of the Wish House Orphanage, a place deeply entwined with Walter's tragic past, reveals fragments of the killer's history. He speaks of Walter's troubled childhood, his abandonment, and his growing obsession with Room 302. Andrew's words paint a picture of a deeply disturbed individual, driven by a twisted spiritual quest, a man whose pain has metastasized into something truly monstrous. His encounter with Henry is brief, and his fate, like Cynthia's, is sealed by Walter's relentless pursuit, adding another layer of tragedy to the unfolding mystery. The journey continues, leading Henry to a building world, a decaying apartment complex that mirrors his own. Here, he finds Eileen Galvin, his neighbor from room 303, a woman he had only exchanged pleasantries with before. Eileen, too, is a victim, but unlike the others, she is still clinging to life, though gravely wounded. Her presence, her vulnerability, awakens a protective instinct in Henry, forging an unexpected bond between them. It is through Eileen, and the horrific events unfolding around them, that Henry begins to truly grasp the scale of Walter Sullivan's atrocities. He learns of the serial killings, the ritualistic nature of the murders, and the chilling implications of Walter's twisted spiritual beliefs. Eileen becomes a symbol of the innocent caught in the crossfire, a stark reminder of the human cost of Walter's dark ambitions. As Henry delves deeper into these nightmare worlds, he uncovers the horrifying truth. Walter Sullivan is attempting to complete a ritual of 21 sacraments, a dark ceremony designed to bring about a spiritual rebirth. This is not merely random violence. It is a meticulously planned sequence of murders, each victim a necessary component in Walter's warped vision. The ultimate goal, the Assumption ritual, is to resurrect his perceived mother and purify the world, a world he sees as corrupted and impure. Each victim represents a step, a sacrifice, leading him closer to this ultimate, horrific goal. The sheer scale and meticulous planning of this ritual reveal the depth of Walter's madness and the insidious power of the cult's teachings that warped his young mind. A crucial piece of this horrifying puzzle is revealed. Walter Sullivan was born in room 302, Henry's very apartment. Abandoned there, he grew up believing the room itself was his mother, a twisted, inanimate entity that he sought to resurrect and appease. This revelation connects Henry directly to Walter's origin, making his entrapment in room 302 not a coincidence, but an integral part of the ritual. The room, once a mundane living space, transforms into a sacred, albeit defiled altar in Walter's deranged mind, the epicenter of his spiritual quest. This profound connection to the room explains Walter's obsession, his desire to return to his mother, and the ritualistic nature of his crimes. Further insights into Walter's dark history come from the meticulous notes and journals of Joseph Schreiber, the previous tenant of room 302. Joseph, a journalist, had been investigating Walter Sullivan for years, documenting his findings, his theories, and the growing dread he felt about the room itself. His apartment, room 302, became his sanctuary and his prison, much like Henry's. Joseph's documents, scattered throughout the various dimensions, provide Henry with invaluable information about Walter's past, his motives, and the true nature of the 21 sacraments. Joseph's fate, too, was sealed by Walter, another victim whose relentless pursuit of the truth led him to a tragic end, his consciousness lingering within the very walls he sought to understand. The climax of Henry's ordeal arrives as he must confront Walter, not just as a physical threat, but as a spiritual entity. The ritual is nearing its completion, and Eileen, gravely injured and weakened, is destined to be the final victim, the mother reborn. Henry must battle Walter, both his physical form and his spectral manifestations, his lingering spirit, to prevent Eileen's sacrifice and to break the cycle of violence. This is a desperate struggle, a fight for survival against a force that transcends the physical, a battle against a man driven by a profound yet utterly twisted spiritual conviction. In the final, harrowing confrontation, Henry faces the spiritual manifestation of Walter Sullivan within the confines of room 302 itself. This is the heart of Walter's twisted ritual, the place where he believes his mother resides and where he intends to complete his grotesque rebirth. Henry, armed with the knowledge he has painstakingly gathered and the desperate will to protect Eileen, battles this spectral entity, its power fueled by years of suffering and dark desires. His success, his ability to prevent the final sacrament, is not just a personal victory, but a momentary triumph against the pervasive darkness that emanates from Silent Hill, a temporary reprieve from the town's relentless pull. The ritual is prevented, the immediate threat averted, but the echoes of Walter Sullivan's suffering and the town's insidious influence will undoubtedly linger. We move now gently into the year 2007 and the unsettling return to a place that mirrors Silent Hill in its shadow depths. This is the story of Alex Shepard, a man adrift, who finds himself drawn back to the fog-shrouded streets of Shepherd's Glen, his childhood home. He arrives with a soldier's bearing, a past shrouded in military service, and a singular, aching purpose: to find his younger brother Josh, who has vanished into the town's unsettling silence. Shepherd's Glen itself is a shadow of what it once was, its familiar streets swallowed by a thick, oppressive fog, its buildings decaying, whispers of neglect clinging to every surface. The air itself feels heavy, laden with unspoken dread. Alex's own family home, once a sanctuary, now stands as a monument to absence and despair. His mother, Lillian, is found within, a ghostly figure rendered catatonic by grief or perhaps something far more sinister, her eyes wide, unseeing, reflecting the town's pervasive horror. His father, Adam, is nowhere to be found, a void that only deepens the mystery. As Alex navigates this transformed landscape, he encounters others caught in its chilling embrace. Deputy Wheeler, a weary lawman struggling to maintain order in a town rapidly unraveling, becomes an uneasy ally. And then there is Elle Holloway, a childhood friend, her face etched with worry, her own brother Nolan among the missing. Together, they represent the few flickering lights of reason in a town consumed by madness, each searching for answers, each grappling with the encroaching darkness. Elle, in particular, embodies the town's quiet desperation, her flyers for the missing children plastered everywhere, a silent testament to the growing despair. The journey through Shepherd's Glen is not merely a search, it is a descent into a nightmare. The town's transformation is not just atmospheric, it is visceral. Monstrous manifestations born from the town's dark heart stalk the fog-choked streets. Alex, with his military training, is forced to confront these horrors. The lurker, a grotesque, amphibious creature, emerges from the watery depths, a chilling harbinger of the town's corruption. The Siam, a twisted, conjoined abomination, its movements unsettlingly human yet utterly alien, patrols the decaying corridors, a constant threat. Each encounter is a brutal dance with the town's inner demons, a reflection of the unspoken sins that fester beneath its surface. These creatures are not random. They are physical manifestations of the town's collective guilt, its hidden pacts, and the suffering they have wrought. It is through these harrowing encounters and the fragmented clues he unearths that Alex begins to piece together the horrifying truth. Shepherd's Glen, he discovers, is not merely a town adjacent to Silent Hill. It is inextricably bound to it, a darker, more insidious connection than mere proximity. For generations, the four founding families of Shepherd's Glen, the Shepherds, the Holloways, the Bartletts, and the Fitches, have maintained a grim pact. To appease the malevolent entities that dwell within Silent Hill, to keep its darkest influences at bay, they have been required to offer ritual sacrifices, their own children. This chilling tradition, passed down through the generations, ensured the town's relative peace, a peace bought at an unspeakable price. The weight of this revelation crushes Alex, for it implicates his own family. He learns that his father, Adam, was not just a stern, distant figure, but an active participant in this horrific covenant. As a member of the town council, Adam Shepherd bore the terrible responsibility of upholding the pact, of ensuring that the sacrifices were made, that the ancient, hungry entities were sated. This knowledge casts a long, dark shadow over Alex's memories, recontextualizing his entire childhood, his father's coldness, his mother's quiet despair. The seemingly ordinary life he believed he lived was built upon a foundation of blood and unspoken horror. His quest leads him to confront the remaining founders, the pillars of the community, now twisted by their complicity. Judge Holloway, a figure of stern justice, conceals a history of unspeakable acts. Mayor Bartlett, once a jovial leader, is now a broken man, consumed by his own guilt and the loss of his son. Dr. Fitch, the town's physician, a man sworn to heal, has instead been complicit in the town's ritualistic horrors, his medical knowledge perverted to serve a darker purpose. Each confrontation peels back another layer of the town's carefully constructed facade, revealing the rot beneath. From them, Alex learns the full sickening extent of his family's dark secrets, the ritualistic nature of the disappearances, and the profound generational trauma that has poisoned Shepherd's Glen. These conversations are not merely exposition. They are a descent into the collective madness of the town, each founder a living testament to the corrupting power of fear and tradition. But the most devastating truth, the one that shatters Alex's very sense of self, concerns his own past. The memories he holds of a childhood accident, of Josh drowning, begin to unravel, revealing a far more insidious reality. Alex was not merely a witness to tragedy. He was, in fact, the intended sacrifice. The pact demanded a shepherd child, and Alex, the eldest, was chosen. The accident where Josh seemingly drowned was a desperate, horrific act of defiance by his father. Adam, unable to sacrifice his own son, his own flesh and blood, had instead pushed Alex into the water, hoping to stage his death, to fulfill the pact without truly ending his life. But in that moment of desperate paternal love, or perhaps profound weakness, Josh, his younger brother, had tragically drowned instead. A cruel twist of fate that sealed his own doom and burdened Alex with a fabricated guilt he had carried for years. Alex had not drowned Josh. He was meant to be the one drowned, and Josh became the unwitting, tragic substitute. The subsequent institutionalization, the blurred memories, the years spent believing he had committed an unspeakable act, were all part of a carefully constructed lie, a desperate attempt to protect him and to bury the truth. This realization, this profound betrayal, reshapes Alex's entire understanding of his life, his family, and his own identity. The guilt he had carried, the trauma he had endured, were not for a crime he committed, but for a sacrifice he was meant to be, a sacrifice his father ultimately shifted to his innocent brother. The weight of this truth is almost unbearable, a scar etched deep into his soul. The journey culminates in the other world, a grotesque, nightmarish reflection of the Shepherd family home, a place where the subconscious fears and hidden truths of the town manifest with terrifying clarity. Here, Alex confronts his father, Adam, not as the man he knew, but as the monstrous asphyxia. This creature, a truly horrifying manifestation, represents Adam's suffocating guilt, his desperate attempts to control and protect, and the ultimate suffocating consequence of his choices. The battle is not just physical, it is a symbolic struggle against the legacy of his father's actions, against the cycle of sacrifice and fear that has defined their family. Defeating asphyxia is a brutal, agonizing act of severing the ties to this dark past, of confronting the source of his own trauma. Finally, Alex faces his mother, Lillian, who, in a moment of heartbreaking clarity, reveals the full, unvarnished history of the family, the depth of their despair, the impossible choices they were forced to make. Her words, whispered in the dim, oppressive air, fill in the final, agonizing gaps in Alex's understanding. She confirms the pact, the sacrifices, the reasons behind Adam's actions, and the profound, silent suffering she endured as a witness to it all. Her confession, a release of years of bottled-up grief and terror, allows Alex to finally understand the full scope of his family's tragedy. And then, in the deepest recesses of the other world, Alex confronts the ultimate manifestation of his own guilt and trauma. This final encounter is deeply personal, a psychological battle against the very demons that have haunted his existence. It is here that he must come to terms with the truth of Josh's death, with the fact that he was the intended victim, and with the immense burden of survival. The exact nature of this confrontation can vary, depending on the choices Alex has made throughout his journey, but it always represents a final reckoning with his past, a desperate struggle for self-acceptance, and perhaps a fragile form of peace. It is the moment where he either succumbs to the darkness or, through sheer force of will, begins to reclaim his fractured self. The town of Shepherd's Glen and its dark mirror, Silent Hill, have forced him to confront not only external horrors, but the deepest, most agonizing truths within his own soul. We drift now, a few years forward, into the year 2012, and the shadowed alleys of a different Silent Hill, where the rain falls in an unending deluge, washing over the broken lives that find themselves snared within its grasp. Here, we encounter Murphy Pendleton, a man whose past is as fractured as the roads he travels, a convict now cast adrift in this cursed town after the prison transport bus, meant to carry him to another facility, crashes with a violent shudder, leaving him alone amidst the fog and the ceaseless downpour. He is not truly alone, however, for shadows follow, and chief among them is Officer Anne-Marie Cunningham, a figure of relentless pursuit, her eyes burning with a cold fire, for she blames Murphy, with a certainty that chills the very bone, for the death of her father. Her vendetta is a living thing, a spectre that stalks his every step, a constant reminder of the unseen forces that bind them both to this place. As Murphy navigates the labyrinthine streets, a landscape of decay and despair, he is forced to confront not only the physical manifestations of the town's malevolence, but also the spectral reflections of his own troubled history. The town, in its insidious wisdom, crafts its horrors from the deepest recesses of the soul, and Murphy's soul is a tapestry woven with threads of regret and violence. He encounters figures both mundane and monstrous, each interaction a twisted mirror reflecting fragments of his shattered past. The line between reality and nightmare blurs, as it always does in Silent Hill, and Murphy is left to question not only what is real, but what he himself has become. Early in his harrowing journey, a fleeting encounter offers a glimmer of something akin to guidance, though shrouded in the town's characteristic enigma. He crosses paths with Frank Coleridge, a mailman, seemingly an ordinary man, yet touched by the town's peculiar madness. Coleridge, with a knowing gaze, bestows upon Murphy a key, a simple object, yet imbued with a symbolic weight, and offers cryptic hints about the true nature of Silent Hill, its hunger for guilt, its insatiable need to strip bare the hidden sins of those who wander into its fog. This encounter serves as a subtle initiation, a whisper of the deeper game the town plays, a game where the currency is suffering and the stakes are the very soul. Murphy's path soon leads him into the gaping maw of the Devil's Pit, a former tourist attraction, now a crumbling monument to forgotten horrors. Here, the town's history, its long-buried secrets, begin to unfurl before him. The Devil's Pit, once a place of amusement, now echoes with the screams of past tragedies, its dark history seeping from the very stones. He descends into its depths, a literal and metaphorical journey into the heart of darkness, where the air is thick with the residue of ancient suffering. The environment itself becomes a character, a living entity that remembers every sorrow, every act of cruelty, and forces Murphy to bear witness to the pain that has stained this land for generations. It is within these oppressive confines, or perhaps just beyond them, that Murphy comes face to face with the bogeyman, a monstrous entity, a towering, grotesque figure, its presence a suffocating weight of dread. This creature is not merely a monster of the town's making, but a direct manifestation of Murphy's own profound guilt, the embodiment of the violence he has committed, the dark urges he has harbored. The bogeyman is a mirror, reflecting the deepest, most terrifying aspects of his inner turmoil, a physical representation of the self-loathing that gnaws at his core. To confront the bogeyman is to confront the unvarnished truth of his own capacity for cruelty, a truth Silent Hill relentlessly forces upon its unwilling inhabitants. And then there is the void, a terrifying shifting phenomenon that tears through the fabric of the town, consuming buildings, streets, and entire sections of the landscape with a hunger that knows no bounds. The void is not merely a physical threat. It is a profound metaphor for Murphy's internal chaos, the destructive force of his unresolved trauma, his anger, his despair, threatening to swallow him whole. It represents the unraveling of his sanity, the disintegration of his world, as the town strips away every pretense, every defense, leaving him exposed to the raw, unbridled terror of his own mind. The void is a constant, encroaching presence, a reminder that the internal battles waged within Silent Hill are as real and as devastating as any external threat. As Murphy delves deeper into the town's oppressive embrace, he begins to piece together the grim tapestry of its history, learning of its enduring legacy of suffering. He discovers how Silent Hill, in its malevolent wisdom, preys upon the guilt of its inhabitants, drawing them in, dissecting their sins, and forcing them to confront the darkest corners of their souls. The town does not merely punish, it compels introspection, a brutal, unforgiving self-examination. Every twisted creature, every decaying edifice, every echoing whisper serves to remind him of the choices he has made, the path he has walked, and the heavy burden of consequence that now weighs upon him. Through a series of harrowing flashbacks and fragmented memories, Murphy is relentlessly forced to confront his own guilt, the very choices that led him to the prison bus, and ultimately to Silent Hill. The town acts as a cruel confessor, demanding he relive the moments that defined his downfall, the decisions that irrevocably altered the course of his life. He is made to understand the depth of his anger, the profound sorrow that festered into a desire for vengeance, and the terrible price he paid for succumbing to those dark impulses. This journey of self-discovery is not one of enlightenment, but of brutal, unflinching self-assessment, a descent into the very core of his being. The most agonizing revelation comes as Murphy uncovers the truth, the raw, unbearable truth, behind the death of his son, a tragedy that shattered his world and ignited the vengeful fire within him. He relives the pain, the helplessness, and the burning desire for retribution that consumed him. It is here that the full scope of his revenge against Patrick Napier, the perpetrator of his son's death, is laid bare. The town forces him to confront not only the act itself, but the emotional maelstrom that drove him to it, the cold, calculated precision of his vengeance, and the hollowness it ultimately left him with. This is the heart of his torment, the wound that Silent Hill relentlessly picks at, refusing to let it heal. The narrative culminates in a series of profound revelations, peeling back the final layers of deceit and self-deception. The ending, shaped by the choices the player makes throughout Murphy's harrowing journey, unveils the complete truth behind his crime, the intricate web of circumstances and motivations that led him to commit the act for which he was imprisoned. Simultaneously, the full extent of Officer Anne Cunningham's vendetta is brought into sharp focus. Her grief, her anger, her own twisted sense of justice, all laid bare. Multiple outcomes are possible, reflecting the complex moral ambiguities of Murphy's actions and Anne's pursuit, leaving the listener to ponder the nature of justice, revenge, and forgiveness in a world where shadows cling to every soul. The town, in its final act, offers not absolution, but a profound, often agonizing understanding of the self. We drift now, gently, into a curious, almost ephemeral corner of our timeline, arriving in the quiet year of 2012, where a different kind of darkness unfurls itself. This is the story of Silent Hill, Book of Memories, a tale that, while standing somewhat apart, still echoes with the familiar, unsettling strains of fate and consequence. Here, the fog lifts, not to reveal a town, but to unveil a deeply personal descent into the labyrinth of one's own past. Our journey begins, as so many do, on a birthday, a day meant for celebration, for looking forward. The protagonist, whose name shifts and blurs like a half-remembered dream, receives a most peculiar gift, an ancient, leather-bound book, its pages heavy with forgotten lore. But this is no ordinary tome, for within its brittle leaves, every moment of their life, every joy, every sorrow, every triviality, every profound turning point is meticulously detailed, written in an unseen hand. It is a chronicle of their very existence laid bare for them to behold. A chilling realization dawns, a whisper in the quiet hours. This book, this record of all that has been, is not merely a passive history. It is a living document, responsive to their touch, to their will. They discover, with a creeping dread and an intoxicating sense of power, that by altering the words upon its pages, by changing a single phrase, a single event, they can rewrite their own past. A moment of regret, a missed opportunity, a painful memory, all become malleable, subject to their newfound dominion. The temptation, as it always is with such forbidden knowledge, is overwhelming, irresistible. To enact these profound alterations, the protagonist must step beyond the veil of their waking world. Their apartment, once a sanctuary of the mundane, begins to shift, to twist, to breathe with an unseen life. It transforms, not into the familiar streets of Silent Hill, but into a liminal space, a hub world, a nexus between realities. From this transformed domesticity, portals open, swirling mist leading to the otherworld versions of their own memories. These are not mere recollections, but fully realized terrifying landscapes, constructed from the very fabric of their subconscious, each one a distorted reflection of a moment they wish to change. Each memory zone, whether it be a forgotten schoolyard or a crumbling hospital wing, is imbued with the emotional resonance of the original event, amplified and twisted by the pervasive darkness of the other world. Within these memory realms, the familiar horrors of Silent Hill manifest, drawn from the protagonist's own psyche, from the collective unconscious, and perhaps from the lingering echoes of the town itself. Pyramid Head, that towering, implacable executioner, stalks these corridors, not as a symbol of James Sunderland's guilt, but as a representation of the protagonist's own buried aggression, their capacity for cruelty, or their fear of judgment. The nurses, their faces obscured, their movements unsettlingly sensual and violent, are here too, perhaps born from anxieties surrounding vulnerability, illness, or the unsettling nature of the human body. Each monstrous encounter is a confrontation with an aspect of themselves, a shadowed reflection of their inner turmoil. These creatures are not merely obstacles, they are manifestations, physical embodiments of the emotional residue left by the past events the protagonist seeks to erase or redefine. As the protagonist navigates these treacherous landscapes, they are driven by a singular purpose: to collect memory fragments. These fragments, glowing shards of forgotten time, are not found easily. They are torn from the defeated forms of the creatures they encounter, each fragment a piece of the altered past, a key to unlocking new areas within the book's narrative. Each fragment collected brings them closer to the heart of a memory, closer to the point of intervention, closer to the moment of change. The act of collecting these fragments is itself a symbolic journey, a piecing together of a fractured self, or perhaps a further fragmentation of what once was whole. Along this solitary path, a mysterious figure emerges from the shadows, a recurring presence in the Silent Hill mythos, though never quite the same. Here, he is known simply as Harry, a shopkeeper of sorts, appearing in the hub world with an array of cryptic advice and essential provisions. He is a guide, but an enigmatic one, his words laden with double meanings, his counsel hinting at deeper truths about the nature of their quest. He offers tools, weapons, and enhancements, but also warnings, subtle nudges towards understanding the gravity of their actions. Harry, in this iteration, serves as a grounded, albeit spectral, counterpoint to the protagonist's increasingly unmoored reality, a voice of reason, or perhaps a harbinger of the consequences to come. For with every alteration, every rewritten line, every erased moment, the protagonist begins to learn a chilling truth. The past is not so easily undone. Altering their history, even with the best of intentions, unleashes unforeseen and often devastating consequences. A change meant to bring happiness might instead sow seeds of sorrow in a different garden. An erased mistake might inadvertently erase a crucial lesson, leading to a new, perhaps greater error. Their present reality, once stable, begins to fray at the edges, subtly shifting, reflecting the ripple effects of their temporal meddling. Friends they once knew might now be strangers. Loved ones might harbour resentments, or their own personality might subtly warp, becoming someone they barely recognise. The narrative of their life becomes a tangled skein, each thread pulled creating tension and disarray elsewhere. Silent Hill, Book of Memories, delves deeply into these profound themes. The inexorable grip of fate, the illusion of free will, and the heavy burden of choice. It asks, what defines us? Is it our experiences, even the painful ones? And what happens when we try to excise those formative moments? It explores the inherent dangers of attempting to rewrite one's own story, suggesting that every scar, every regret, every triumph contributes to the intricate tapestry of who we are. The game becomes a philosophical exploration, a cautionary tale about the perils of tampering with the delicate balance of existence. The journey culminates in a final confrontation, not with a monster from the town's history, but with a manifestation of the protagonist's deepest fears, their most profound regrets, or perhaps the very embodiment of the book's power itself. This boss battle, occurring within the pages of the Book of Memories, is a symbolic struggle for self-acceptance, for the right to define one's own narrative, even if that narrative is imperfect. It is a fight against the echoes of their own choices, the spectre of their altered past, and the potential for a future forever warped by their hubris. The physical manifestation of this final foe is often a grotesque amalgamation of their anxieties, a mirror held up to the fractured self they have become. And so, the tale concludes, not with a singular resolution, but with a branching path, reflecting the myriad possibilities born from the protagonist's choices. Depending on the extent of their alterations, the nature of their interventions, and the understanding they ultimately gain or fail to gain, one of several different endings awaits. Each ending paints a portrait of their new reality, a life reshaped by their tampering, Some endings might offer a semblance of peace, a fragile new beginning, while others might plunge them into a deeper, more profound despair, a life irrevocably damaged by their attempts to control it. The Book of Memories closes, but the story it tells, the life it has rewritten, continues to unfold, leaving the protagonist and us to ponder the true cost of chasing a perfect past. We're drifting slowly into the timeline of Silent Hill, a tangled web of spiritual torment and quiet tragedies that began with the town's dreams of paradise, only to unravel into something of haunted shadows and unending horror. Born in the unassuming mists of Maine, where ancient rituals brought forth a fragile deity to grant wishes, it grew into a nexus of forgotten sins and festering guilt. But beneath the veneer of ordinary life, something darker lurked. This is the story of how a simple vision for salvation became a chronicle of souls trapped in a cycle of suffering, and how one town's darkness still echoes in whispers through the quiet hours. Born in the shadows of the 17th century, the town of Silent Hill was not always a place of dread. It began as a peaceful settlement, a haven for those seeking solace and a new beginning. The early settlers, deeply spiritual and connected to the land, established their community on sacred ground, unknowingly disturbing ancient energies. They spoke of a primordial power, a deity that could grant wishes, a benevolent force that resonated with their hopes and dreams. This was a time of innocence, a period before the veil between worlds thinned, before the whispers began to twist the hearts of men. The town prospered, built on faith and the promise of a better life. But even then, a subtle current of unease flowed beneath the surface, a premonition of the darkness to come. The very earth held a memory, a spiritual residue, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken its dormant power. But beneath this nascent peace, a seed of discord was planted. As the 18th century dawned, a new wave of settlers arrived, bringing with them different beliefs and a thirst for control. The harmonious connection with the land began to fray, replaced by exploitation and conflict. The original inhabitants, those who understood the delicate balance of the sacred ground, found themselves marginalized, their wisdom ignored. This shift marked the true beginning of Silent Hill's descent. The town's spiritual core, once a source of strength, became a vulnerability. The gentle whispers of the land turned into unsettling murmurs, and the benevolent deity began to stir, its nature subtly corrupted by the changing energies. This was the era when the town started to forget its true origins, paving the way for the cults and dark rituals that would later define its tragic legacy. The innocence was lost, replaced by a growing shadow, a sense of foreboding that permeated the very air of Silent Hill, awaiting its full manifestation. This is the story of how a simple vision for spiritual awakening became a chronicle of souls trapped in a purgatorial cycle, and how one town's festering guilt still echoes in whispers through the quiet hours. As the 19th century unfolded, the shadow deepened, and the town of Silent Hill became a crucible for dark desires. The promise of the primordial power, once a source of hope, was twisted into a tool for manipulation and control. The earliest iterations of the cults began to form, drawn to the town's unique spiritual resonance. They sought to harness the deity's power, not for collective good, but for individual salvation, or, more often, for vengeance and purification. The town's history became intertwined with tales of witchcraft and persecution, as fear and paranoia gripped the community. Innocent women were accused, condemned and sacrificed, their suffering further tainting the land. The spiritual energy, once pure, became a receptacle for human cruelty and despair, creating a feedback loop that amplified the town's inherent darkness. The mist grew thicker, the air heavier, as the collective unconscious of Silent Hill began to manifest its hidden horrors. The town was no longer merely a place. It was becoming an entity, a living nightmare fueled by human suffering. Then, in the early 20th century, the first true cult emerged from the shadows, the Order. Driven by a fervent belief in their god, a deity they called God, they sought to bring about paradise on earth through ritual and sacrifice. Their dogma was a grotesque distortion of the town's original spiritual reverence, promising salvation through suffering and purification through death. This era saw the construction of the Brookhaven Hospital, a place that would later become synonymous with unspeakable horrors, and the rise of charismatic yet deeply disturbed leaders who exploited the town's spiritual vulnerabilities. The Order's rituals, often involving human sacrifice and the manipulation of the town's psychic energy, began to tear at the fabric of reality, blurring the lines between the physical and spiritual worlds. The town's historical suffering, the echoes of past injustices, coalesced into a potent force, ready to manifest as the terrifying creatures that would soon populate its fog-shrouded streets. The seeds of Alessa Gillespie's tragic fate were sown in this era, as the cult's desperate attempts to birth their god set the stage for the town's ultimate torment. The mid-20th century brought further tragedy, as the town's dark history began to claim its most innocent victims. The orphanage, a place meant for refuge, became another site of the cult's sinister influence. Children, particularly those with strong psychic sensitivities, were exploited, their nascent abilities twisted for the Order's nefarious ends. This period saw the deepening of Alessa Gillespie's connection to the town's spiritual essence, a connection that would ultimately make her both its greatest victim and its most potent weapon. Her immense psychic power, fueled by years of abuse and neglect, began to shape the other world, molding it into a reflection of her inner torment. The town itself seemed to breathe, its streets and buildings taking on a malevolent life of their own, responding to the suffering within its walls. The cult, growing ever more desperate to bring about their paradise, intensified their rituals, unknowingly accelerating the town's descent into a self-created hell. The quiet suffering of the children, the hidden pain within the orphanage, became another layer in Silent Hill's complex tapestry of dread, adding to the psychic residue that permeated every corner of the town. The 1970s marked a pivotal and devastating turning point, a decade etched in the very soul of Silent Hill with fire and unholy birth. This was the era of Alessa Gillespie's immolation, a horrific ritual orchestrated by the Order, led by the fanatical Dahlia Gillespie, Alessa's own mother. In their twisted zeal to birth their god, they set Alessa ablaze, believing her immense psychic power, amplified by suffering, would serve as the perfect vessel. But the ritual went catastrophically wrong. Alessa, consumed by agony and rage, inadvertently split her soul, one half remaining within her tortured body, the other manifesting as a newborn infant, Cheryl, found by Harry Mason. This event didn't just scar Alessa, it scarred Silent Hill itself. The town became a living nightmare, its reality fractured, its streets shifting between the mundane and the terrifying otherworld, a direct manifestation of Alessa's trauma and fury. The fire, meant to bring forth a god, instead unleashed a torrent of psychic energy, birthing the monstrous creatures that would forever haunt its fog-laden streets. The town's spiritual core, already corrupted, was now irrevocably bound to Alessa's pain, making her both its victim and its unwitting architect of torment. A little over a decade later, in 1983, the echoes of Alessa's suffering reverberated through the town, drawing Harry Mason back into its inescapable grip. His adopted daughter, Cheryl, the innocent half of Alessa's soul, was inexplicably drawn to Silent Hill. Harry, a loving father, followed her into the mist, only to find himself in a nightmare beyond comprehension. The town, now fully transformed by Alessa's psychic influence, presented him with a labyrinth of shifting realities, grotesque monsters, and cryptic clues. He encountered Dahlia Gillespie, still obsessed with her cult's agenda, and Sybil Bennett, a bewildered police officer caught in the town's madness. Harry's journey was one of frantic searching, confronting his own fears and slowly piecing together the horrifying truth of Alessa's past. He eventually faced the culmination of the Order's dark rituals, the attempted birth of their god, and managed to escape, not with Cheryl, but with a new infant, a reincarnation of Alessa, whom he named Heather. This harrowing experience cemented Silent Hill's reputation as a place where personal demons manifest as tangible horrors, and where the line between reality and nightmare was irrevocably blurred. Years passed, and in 1993, the town's insidious influence reached beyond its borders, touching the unsuspecting life of James Sunderland. He received a letter, seemingly from his deceased wife Mary, beckoning him back to Silent Hill, to their special place. James, consumed by grief and a desperate hope, embarked on a journey that would force him to confront the darkest truths about himself and his relationship with Mary. The town, ever the mirror of the soul, manifested his guilt and repressed memories as grotesque creatures and disturbing environments. He encountered other lost souls, like the enigmatic Maria, a seductive doppelganger of Mary, and the tormented Angela Orozco, each trapped in their own personal hells. James's quest was not about saving Silent Hill, but about facing his own complicity in Mary's death, his subconscious desires, and the crushing weight of his guilt. The town forced him to acknowledge his role in ending Mary's suffering, a truth he had desperately tried to bury. His journey through the fog and blood-soaked corridors was a descent into his own psyche, a purgatorial ordeal designed to either break him or offer a sliver of self-acceptance. As the new millennium dawned, in 2001, Silent Hill continued its relentless psychological assault, this time on the fractured mind of Henry Townshend. Trapped within his apartment in South Ashfield, a town seemingly far removed from Silent Hill, Henry found himself a prisoner of his own home. A mysterious hole appeared in his bathroom, leading to a series of surreal, interconnected worlds that were direct manifestations of the town's spiritual energy and the pervasive influence of Walter Sullivan, a serial killer with a twisted connection to the Order. Henry's nightmare was one of isolation and claustrophobia. As he navigated these disturbing dimensions, each reflecting a victim of Sullivan's gruesome rituals. He encountered Eileen Galvin, his neighbor, who also became entangled in Sullivan's dark machinations. This installment explored themes of obsession, ritualistic murder, and the idea that Silent Hill's curse could spread beyond its geographical confines, infecting even seemingly normal places. Henry's struggle was not just for survival, but for understanding the complex, ritualistic nature of Sullivan's crimes and the profound spiritual corruption that fueled them, a corruption deeply rooted in the town's dark history. A few years later, in 2004, the town's malevolent grip tightened once more, ensnaring Travis Grady, a lonely truck driver haunted by his own traumatic past. While on a delivery, Travis veered off course and found himself drawn to Silent Hill, arriving just as the devastating fire at the Gillespie home, the one that critically burned Alessa, was reaching its peak. This prequel offered a glimpse into the events leading up to the first game, weaving Travis's personal demons into the town's unfolding nightmare. He encountered a young Alessa, her mind a maelstrom of pain and nascent psychic power, and Dahlia Gillespie in the throes of her fanaticism. Travis's journey through the familiar yet nascent horrors of Silent Hill forced him to confront his own childhood trauma, the memories of his mentally ill mother, and the dark secrets of his family. The town, ever the mirror, presented him with manifestations of his guilt and fear, pushing him to the brink of madness. His path through the fog-choked streets and decaying institutions was a desperate search for meaning and perhaps a fleeting moment of self-redemption amidst the town's burgeoning darkness. By 2007, Silent Hill's curse had spread its tendrils to the military, drawing in Alex Shepard, a soldier returning home to Shepherd's Glen, a town intrinsically linked to Silent Hill. Alex found his hometown shrouded in mist, his family missing, and the once familiar streets twisted into grotesque reflections of his own fractured psyche. This entry explored the dark pacts made by the founding families of Shepherd's Glen, who, generations ago, sacrificed their children to appease the town's malevolent forces and prevent its full descent into hell. Alex's quest to find his younger brother, Joshua, and unravel his family's secrets led him through a nightmarish landscape where the line between his memories and the town's reality was constantly blurred. He encountered Elle Holloway, a childhood friend also searching for her missing family, and slowly uncovered the horrifying truth about his own past and his role in his brother's disappearance. The game delved deep into themes of family trauma, sacrifice, and the inescapable consequences of generational sin, revealing that the town's influence was not merely psychological, but deeply rooted in ancient, blood-soaked traditions. In 2012, Silent Hill's torment found a new victim in Murphy Pendleton, a convict whose prison transport mysteriously crashed near the cursed town. Murphy, a man burdened by a dark past and a desperate desire for revenge, found himself trapped in a purgatorial landscape where his deepest regrets and violent tendencies materialized as tangible horrors. This installment explored the concept of Silent Hill as a personalized hell, tailoring its manifestations to the individual sins and psychological wounds. Murphy's journey through the town's decaying streets and surreal environments forced him to confront the consequences of his actions, particularly the tragic death of his son and his subsequent quest for vengeance. He encountered enigmatic figures like Anne-Marie Cunningham, a correctional officer with her own vendetta against Murphy, and the mysterious DJ, seemingly a guide through the town's labyrinthine horrors. Murphy's struggle was a desperate fight for survival, but more profoundly, a battle for his soul, as the town stripped away his defenses and forced him to confront the monstrous parts of himself. His fate, whether redemption or eternal damnation, lay in his ability to face the truth of his own darkness. And now, in 2023, the influence of Silent Hill has expanded, reaching across continents and manifesting in new, terrifying ways as we drift into the era of Silent Hill, Ascension. This interactive streaming series plunges multiple characters across vastly different locations into the town's pervasive nightmare, demonstrating that its curse is no longer confined to a single geographical area. The story unfolds not as a solitary journey, but as a collective horror, where the audience's choices directly impact the narrative, shaping the fates of these tormented souls. We first encounter the Hernandez family, residing in a seemingly idyllic rural town in Pennsylvania, their lives shattered by a series of inexplicable and terrifying supernatural phenomena. Their quiet existence is violently interrupted by grotesque manifestations, deeply personal horrors that prey upon their individual guilt and unspoken traumas. Simultaneously, far across the Atlantic, the Johansen family in Norway experiences their own descent into madness. Their remote, isolated community, steeped in ancient traditions, becomes a new canvas for Silent Hill's insidious influence, proving that the town's reach is truly global. Central to the Norwegian narrative is Ingrid Johansen, a figure of unsettling conviction, who leads a cult known as the Faithful. Ingrid and her followers adhere to a chilling belief that a cataclysmic global apocalypse is imminent, and the only way to avert it is through a ritualistic appeasement of a newly introduced entity, the Great Devourer. This entity, a fresh and terrifying addition to the Silent Hill lore, is presented as a primal force, a hunger for suffering, a manifestation of collective human despair. The Faithful's rituals are desperate, born of fear and a twisted hope, but they only serve to deepen the encroaching darkness. As the narrative unfolds, each character is forced to grapple with their past traumas, their deepest regrets, and the psychological scars that Silent Hill so expertly exploits. The town, or rather, its pervasive influence, acts as a mirror, reflecting their inner turmoil as tangible, grotesque monsters and disturbing visions. We see characters confront the ghosts of their past, their personal sins and sorrows given monstrous form. A poignant example of this is James Wilson, a member of the Hernandez family. He is relentlessly haunted by the death of his young daughter, Laura, and the agonizing question of his own culpability in her demise. His guilt, his grief, and his attempts to suppress the truth manifest as terrifying creatures and inescapable hallucinations, driving him to the brink of madness. His journey becomes a desperate search for absolution, or at least understanding, amidst the overwhelming horror. Silent Hill, Ascension, introduces not only the Great Devourer, but also a host of new monsters, each uniquely tailored to the specific traumas and cultural anxieties of the affected communities. These creatures are not merely physical threats. They are psychological manifestations embodying the characters' fears, their guilt, and the dark secrets they hold. The lore expands, suggesting that the Great Devourer is not a singular entity in the traditional sense, but rather a sentient culmination of collective human suffering, a monstrous hunger that feeds on despair and trauma, growing stronger with each new victim. The overarching narrative explores profound themes of collective trauma and the insidious spread of Silent Hill's curse. It meticulously links the suffering of the Hernandez family in Pennsylvania with that of the Johansen family in Norway, demonstrating that the town's influence is a contagion, a spiritual plague that transcends geographical boundaries. The family's individual tragedies are woven into a larger tapestry of global despair, suggesting that humanity's shared guilt and unresolved traumas create the very conditions for the Great Devourer to thrive. In a chilling revelation, the Great Devourer is ultimately unveiled to be a manifestation of the collective guilt and trauma of these affected communities. It is not an external demon, but an internal one, born from the accumulated suffering, the unaddressed sins, and the pervasive despair of humanity itself. This entity feeds on fear, on regret, on the very fabric of human misery, growing in power as more souls succumb to its influence. The unique interactive nature of Ascension means that the audience's choices are paramount. We're drifting slowly into the timeline of Silent Hill, a fractured mirror reflecting the darkest corners of the human soul, born from guilt and grief, only to unravel into a landscape of fog and unspeakable horrors. Born in the quiet despair of a small town, where ancient rituals stirred forgotten gods and personal demons took monstrous forms, it grew into a sprawling narrative of tormented psyches and existential dread. But beneath the surface of each new nightmare, something older, something more profound, always lingered. This is the story of how a place of quiet suffering became a crucible for the damned, and how the echoes of its past still whisper through the quiet hours. Born in the fading light of the 1970s, we find the first stirrings of the town's peculiar darkness. Alessa Gillespie, a child touched by a malevolent cult and scarred by a ritual fire, became the unwitting vessel for a god of torment. Her pain, her fury, her fractured soul began to reshape the very fabric of Silent Hill, twisting its reality into a reflection of her inner torment. The town, once a simple lakeside community, started to breathe with a sinister life of its own, its fog a shroud for the horrors yet to come. This was not a sudden cataclysm, but a slow, insidious corruption, a wound festering beneath the surface of an otherwise ordinary place. As the 1980s dawned, the cult's influence deepened, their misguided devotion fueled by a desire to birth their god. We see the tragic consequences of their zeal, the suffering inflicted upon innocents, and the desperate attempts to contain Alessa's burgeoning power. Her fragmented soul splintered into different manifestations, sought both escape and retribution. The town itself became a living entity, its streets and buildings shifting, its monsters born from the collective unconscious, from the deepest fears and sins of those who walked its cursed ground. Each step into the fog was a step deeper into a nightmare, a descent into a psychological labyrinth where personal demons took on tangible forms. The 1990s brought us deeper into the town's lore, revealing the intricate web of its history, the ancient beliefs that predated the cult, and the tragic figures drawn into its orbit. we witness the devastating impact of the cult's machinations, the sacrifices made, and the endless cycle of suffering they perpetuated. The town, by now, was a character in itself, a malevolent force that preyed on the guilt and despair of its visitors, forcing them to confront their deepest transgressions. The air grew heavy with unspoken truths, with the weight of past sins and the promise of unending torment. The fog thickened, obscuring not just the path ahead, but the very line between reality and delusion. Moving into the early 2000s, the focus shifted, becoming more introspective, more concerned with the individual's journey through Silent Hill's psychological landscape. We encountered characters burdened by profound guilt, their personal hells manifesting in the town's twisted streets and grotesque inhabitants. The town became a mirror, reflecting their inner turmoil, forcing them to confront the unspeakable acts they had committed, or the profound losses they had endured. This was not merely a place of physical danger, but a crucible for the soul, a place where redemption was sought, but rarely found, and where the past clung like a suffocating shroud. The quiet hours were filled with the whispers of regret and the echoes of choices that could never be undone. As the decade progressed, the narrative expanded, exploring different facets of Silent Hill's influence, its reach extending beyond the town limits, touching the lives of those connected to its dark history. We saw the lingering effects of its power, the way it twisted minds and corrupted souls, even from afar. The town's mythology deepened, revealing layers of ancient curses and forgotten pacts, all contributing to its enduring malevolence. Each new story added another thread to the intricate tapestry of its suffering, another testament to its ability to draw in the lost, the broken, and the damned. The fog, it seemed, was not merely a meteorological phenomenon, but a living, breathing entity, a gateway to a realm of unending despair. The 2010s brought new interpretations, new perspectives on the town's enduring horror, exploring the generational trauma it inflicted and the cyclical nature of its torment. We witnessed the desperate attempts to break free from its grasp, to escape the inescapable, and the tragic realization that some scars run too deep to ever truly heal. The town, in these later years, felt less like a physical place and more like a state of being, a psychological prison from which there was no escape. The monsters, ever more grotesque, became even more potent symbols of inner demons, of the fears and anxieties that plague the human condition. The quiet hours were no longer just for reflection, but for the chilling realization that some nightmares never truly end. And finally, as we drift into the present, we arrive at the latest echoes of Silent Hill's pervasive dread. The narrative continues to explore the profound impact of past choices, the weight of collective guilt, and the devastating consequences of unresolved trauma. The town, in its latest manifestation, remains a potent symbol of psychological horror, a place where personal demons are made flesh, and where the line between reality and nightmare is irrevocably blurred. The fog still rolls in, the sirens still wail, and the monsters still lurk, ever-present reminders of the darkness that lies beneath the surface of human experience. The story, it seems, is never truly over, for the town of Silent Hill continues to exist as a testament to the enduring power of grief, guilt, and the horrors that fester in the quiet corners of the soul. From the ancient rituals to the modern-day psychological torment, silent,